Welcome everyone to today's Environment Committee meeting. Members of the public may like to follow at London Assembly on Twitter and use the hashtag Assembly Environment for this meeting. Please may I remind everyone to switch phones to silent mode and ask that members and guests ensure that electronic devices are not placed in front of their microphones. Today our main item of business is a question and answer session with the Deputy Mayor for Environment and Energy. Before we begin, we have a few items of business to attend to. Can I now ask our committee clerk, Jack Boo, to confirm any apologies for today's meeting?
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies from Assembly Member Cooper, who will be attending virtually on Zoom.
Thank you, and may we say get well soon as well. Declarations of interest. Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2 and ask if members have any other interest to declare? No, thank you. Minutes. Can we confirm the minutes of the Environment Committee meeting held on 7th of February 2023 to be a correct record? Thank you. Summary list of actions. Can I ask the committee to note the completed outstanding and closed actions arising from previous meetings? Okay. Thank you. Action taken under delegated authority. Can I ask the committee to note the action taken by the Chair under delegated authority, taken in consultation with group lead members, namely to agree the committee's report, London Underwater, as attached at Appendix 1? Thank you. We now move on to our main item of business, a question and answer session with the Deputy Mayor. Welcome to our guests. We are joined in the chamber by Shirley Rodrigues, Deputy Mayor for Environment and Energy, Catherine Barber, Assistant Director, Environment and Energy at the GLA, and Elliot Treharne, Assistant Director for Transport, Infrastructure and Connectivity at the GLA. Welcome to you all and thank you for joining us. Deputy Mayor, if I can begin with you. First of all, I should note that you're only with us till 12:30. I believe that was a mix-up in communication. I think it's fair to say that there is some unhappiness among the committee about it, and I'm just expressing that for the record, but I do understand it was a mix-up.
Just to clarify, it wasn't my mix-up.
Okay, thank you. We were expecting a progress update on the environment strategy, and that's not arrived. We also received some late correspondence last night around Solar Together. Again, just to express from the committee, there is an unhappiness about it not being ideal for us to receive correspondence so late. Could I ask generally on the environment strategy when we can expect progress updates, and can you give a commitment that that will be more regular in the future?
Yes, of course, and apologies for that. The progress report that is due should be published before the end of the financial year, so not long now, so we're trying to just get it through sign-off and get it to you. We're committing to do another one in September 23, which will cover the period from May 22 to 23.
Thank you. And what impact has new targets had, such as the new net zero target?
Well, the team are working through the implications. So, for example, we're taking it as read, essentially, that we need to do that. There are a lot of no-regrets actions that are happening already, whether it's estate decarbonisation on the functional body estate, or whether it's working on, for example, the ultra-low emission zone, or very many other schemes that we're doing to promote modal shift. So all those things are going ahead whilst we do initiatives like the climate budgeting process that we've just been through, so to identify the extent of the works that are needed to make sure that the functional body estates are decarbonised, helping to meet that 2030 target. Transport for London are looking at, what their plans are more generally for, how does London meet that net zero 2030 target as well, with all the things that they're able to do. The Fire Brigade have been looking at how they can decarbonise their estate, look at their vehicles as well, so across the whole piece, basically. And as ever, we've been publishing guidance on some of the things that we've been doing on the London Plan, for example, on embodied carbon and so on.
Thank you. In terms of future work, so the committee recently have undergone an investigation into light pollution. Mm-hmm. We had many guests who spoke really articulately about how much air and noise pollution is often on the agenda, but light pollution is often missed. We had a scientist who came in and talked about the adverse effects of light pollution. Now, we've got projects like the MSG Sphere, which are incredibly contentious and controversial. Mm-hmm. Do you think there is a gap currently in the GLA plan around light pollution?
I don't think so, because the London Plan has a number of policies that talk about how, in looking at new developments, they have to take account of light pollution as well as the sort of wider impact on the public realm. So that's there already. That is being so when we get the strategic developments that are referred to the Mayor, that's looked at, and the boroughs then are supposed to be taking account of the London Plan in their local plans and the determination of their local planning applications. Of course, there's an issue, as ever, of enforcement at local level. That's a wider planning enforcement issue, as I'm sure your colleagues on the Planning Committee are aware of.
Would you see light pollution as something that falls under your brief in terms of someone who takes responsibility for it?
I think it's a shared thing. It's a bit like net zero. You know, whilst the policy might be within the environment strategy in terms of the impact on biodiversity, for example, or the wider environment, it's also an issue for the public realm, which is why it's included in the London plan. And we would want to make sure that, you know, for example, highways design, the local authorities are taking account of, for example, street lights, making sure that their impact on light pollution and impacts on the light pollution on biodiversity, for example, are taken into account. So as I said, you know, I'm sure it could sit in one area. It's a bit like noise pollution. I guess it sits with us, but a lot of the noise pollution actions are largely around transportation, which is where the policy lead sits.
I totally hear that it is a shared responsibility, and I'm not being churlish. I think it is important that some things are cross-cutting as net zero. Is there not a worry, though, when something is so cross-cutting that actually ultimately no one takes responsibility for it because everyone assumes that some other department is doing the work?
There is always that risk, but I don't think that's true of many of the things that we're doing at the GLA. So, for example, on net zero, I chair I make sure that the various functional bodies are looking at action on net zero, for example. So the climate budgeting work through the team, Catherine's team, are very embedded, not quite embedded, but, you know, almost feels like embedded into the functional bodies in terms of talking to them and giving them advice on how to take forward actions, whether it's net zero or air pollution or biodiversity or waste and recycling.
Does the GLA currently have any plans for supplementary planning documents relating to light for the whole of London?
I don't. I'm not aware of any, but I can certainly try and find out from Jules, who, you know, the planning team there.
Thank you. If you'd be happy to write to the committee once you've spoken to Jules. And finally, just on me for light before I hand over to Assemblymember Devenish, the areas that the Mayor definitely has very direct responsibility for is his development corporations. Does he have any plans to implement any further limits on light pollution on land that he manages?
I'm not aware of anything. Again, I can write back to you on that. So I don't know about that.
Thank you. Is this not indicating some of the problem in terms of, I know, for instance, you're very on your brief about air pollution, for instance. I feel like, and I'm sure you'll demonstrate this later on in the session, but when it comes to light pollution, when we ask representatives, very often it's someone else's department or someone else's problem.
Well, where it's a specific planning concern, then of course I defer to Jules and the planning team. You know, what I wouldn't want to do is mislead the committee by saying these things are going ahead, so I'd like to check, unless I don't suppose you know. No.
Thank you. Assemblymember Devenish.
I just wanted to ask, I mean, the meeting that we had recently on light pollution, it was quite clear there was gaps in terms of, as the chairman said, in terms of who picks things up. And you may have seen in the press that the Corporation of London have decided that they are going to do a study on what needs to be done to fill those gaps. Actually, it came out coincidentally a couple of days after our last meeting. Have you spoken to the Corporation of London about what they are doing? And do you not feel like in many things, actually, various boroughs can do wonderful work as they do, but you are the GLA, and sometimes you need to pick up and actually get a grip and own something. So have you spoken to the corporation on what they're doing to make sure that we've got joined up policy in terms of light pollution, please?
I specifically haven't. I'm not aware that anybody in our environment team has, but I'm not sure about the planning team, because I would imagine that's more of a planning area lead. And again, you know, we can follow up on that. But just to say, there are regular meetings on a whole host of issues that, you know, the Mayor could pick up on, and there are some things that, you know, obviously that we do lead on and the boroughs follow, and vice versa, and I think that's a healthy thing.
Okay, but if you could maybe update us on where we are on that, would be quite useful, because I do think sometimes we just sort of have quite a laissez-faire attitude in this building, and we actually need to make sure somebody has got a grip of an issue rather than say they may or may not be dealing with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to your wellbeing and sustainability measure. So in January, you launched a consultation looking at wellbeing and sustainability, which aims to be a core indicator of London's success as a place to work and live. How do you plan to use the new wellbeing and sustainability measure?
Well, it's still being developed at the moment, so I think we're due. It's being led through our GLA City Intelligence Unit, and I think I was at a soft launch in this building a few weeks ago, where they were presenting on where they'd got to. So due to launch shortly, and that is about pulling together a collection of indicators and then using that to report on progress. So it's akin to the London Sustainable Development Commission sustainability basket of indicators. So that's used to track progress and then identify areas where either areas to talk about that are going well and how much further we can go, or there are areas where things aren't, maybe going as fast as we would like, and to use that as a way of identifying areas to prioritise.
It sounds like a really interesting piece of work. Thank you. We look forward to being updated. We move on to a section now on energy. I'm going to hand over to Assembly Member Devenish.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. You've probably seen the headline on the front page of the London Evening Standard last month. Inside London's big solar scandal rather sums up solar power, doesn't it?
No, because actually in London we have been doing very well on solar power installations. So the first 3 phases, for example, of Solar Together were very successful, which is why we wanted to expand it London-wide to under Solar Together 4 and then Solar Together 5. We've been doing a lot of work on promoting solar installations through the Mayor's London Plan, so on statutory developments that are referred to him. Local authorities are doing a lot, with our help. So I wouldn't say it's not going well, and it's actually what's needed. I think what isn't helpful, and I think it really illustrates the problem that we have about the supply chain, is that the increase in people's demands for rooftop solar, partly because of the energy crisis, but partly because of the recognition that people want to do more to help tackle climate change, has meant that the supply chain really haven't caught up. So I think you're aware, the Chair raised, that one of the installers for Solar Together at the moment that iChooser have contracted with, they have been suspended by the certification agency. We are looking to see to find out what the situation is with iChooser, who we contract with, who then contract with that particular installer, to try and understand what the situation is and how they propose to remedy that. But the demand for solar and our support for it through the London Plan and through the programmes that we have is absolutely responding to that desire to do more.
We absolutely agree. We all need to do more, but the reality is you are responsible. You can't just say it's your supply chain that has fallen over. You are responsible. So in the note we only got this morning, you, on point 2 on your note, it's classic. It is classic Mr. Khan's language. I mean, I'm not exactly sure what it means. It says, and I'll read it, the installation contracts for Solar Together London exist between the customer and Get UK. No accountability that you are ultimately accountable. It is therefore a decision for the customer whether they want to proceed or choose to cancel. Don't you feel, as the GLA and as the Mayor's representative, you should give those very unhappy customers some guidance? Should they cancel, or should they just proceed with the poor, shoddy service they've had?
So shall I just explain the contractual regime? So first of all, under Solar Together, we contracted with iChooser in order to carry out what we call a reverse auction, which is basically understanding who is interested in putting solar panels on their roofs, collecting those all up and auctioning that off to suppliers in order to get a discount then individually going to a supplier. And that process, which is our contract with iChooser, has worked extremely well. And on average, and I can't remember what the average is, about 20-25% discount on solar panels, which is partly why there has been a huge increase in take-up and interest under Solar Together 4 and 5.
And how has it worked in terms of complaints from customers?
So if I can finish the contractual chain, Solar Together is then the framework. iChooser then, having got these interests and a discount, then go back to the customers to say, are you interested in taking this forward? We'll do a detailed quote to understand the number of solar panels and what the cost is to you, etc., etc. And then they allocate that to individual suppliers, and there are 3 suppliers on the contract at the moment. When a customer wants to go ahead, they contract with the installer. So in this case, it was Get. There are 2 others as well. So that's why the contract is between the customer and that company. However, iChooser have a responsibility for having contracted with and selected and assured those installers, including Get. So yes, of course, the Mayor is very angry about the deficiencies that have come about with the scheme, particularly that installer and particularly iChooser's management of that. He absolutely is right behind customers and wants to make sure that iChooser pursue those installations and make sure that deliver on their promises, and where they don't, that people get their deposits back, or the installations are complete, whatever they want to do. So that's the process. So as I've said, the Mayor has said he wants that to happen. He's instructed our legal team to look at what options we have as well, in case we need to use them. And there are regular conversations, daily in fact, between the team and iChooser to make sure that deliver on their responsibilities and on the certification scheme, who provide the insurance-backed guarantee to the deposits.
There's not a single number on this bit of paper that we only received as this meeting started. How many customers have successfully had a system installed? How many complaints? According to the London Evening Standard, there's 400 complaints. And you didn't answer my question about the guidance. Your point two, again, it's the decision for the customer whether they want to proceed or choose to cancel. Shouldn't you say to those customers, as the ultimate body that actually marketed this product to them, that yes, they should continue or they should cancel?
Well, I think it's an individual decision for those customers, but what we have asked iChooser to do when they're writing out to those customers to say this has happened, that they should give them a very clear decision tree about what their options are. So if they really feel that they want to carry on, then what is their decision route? And if they don't want to, then what do they need to do in order to either get their deposits back or terminate the contract completely? So that has been made clear
and
to iChooser.
And how many customers are we talking about here?
That I don't have. I don't know, Catherine, if you have.
Sorry, we've asked iChooser to do an audit of Get UK's customers for Phase 4 and Phase 5 to give us those numbers.
Have you got any numbers you can share with me on this subject?
I think I don't want to mislead the committee and give numbers which we might then have to correct very shortly. As soon as we've got accurate information, I will share it with you.
I have to say, very unsatisfactory, really, the way that this has been controlled from beginning to end. But, Chair, I will move on to the next successful project that the Mayor has done in terms of energy. London Power. When is London Power going to actually make some money?
I don't know if you've noticed, but there seems to be an energy crisis on. So no company is switching customers or actually telling people to switch customers.
A lot of energy companies are actually making a lot of money at the moment, actually.
Well, and this is why the Mayor's been talking about windfall taxes, which I think, the government have been very slow to follow up on.
Yes, but this is not why I'm asking you. I'm asking you about London Power. Why hasn't it made any money still?
As you've been told before, I think we have paused any switching or any marketing of activity, just like every other energy company, because of the energy crisis. So until we are able to confirm what the new normal is, I guess, in the energy system, and we won't know that for a while yet, we're not proposing to do any marketing, just like many other. In fact, all the other energy companies. As soon as that changes, then we'll be reviewing whether the way London Power is framed at the moment is still the right thing to do for customers in London, or whether we need to do something a bit more innovative. But those options are being looked at shortly, I think, so that we can understand what our options are and then make those decisions about the contract.
So when do you think you'll be able to come back with some detail on this subject and perhaps some numbers even?
Well, we can certainly come back to you in a couple of months on what the options might be for London Power. Numbers will depend on whether they're commercial in confidence.
Well, I hope there will be some numbers, because obviously, how come you're the most transparent mayor ever? We were told by Mr. Khan. So some numbers, surely you can share some numbers.
Some numbers are contractually confidential, so we're not able to share them. But what we can share, what we're able to share, we will share. Yeah.
Fantastic, I don't think. Moving on, green transition and green skills. Perhaps we can get more progress on this one. The Mayor's Academy's programme was launched in January 22, including 5 green skills hubs. Do you have any update on these, and possibly even some numbers, including the scale of the training now provided, and how does it relate to the Mayor's 2030 net zero targets, please?
So my understanding, there are 6 Green Academy hubs with a total grant value of £1.5 million, and they're going to be supporting nearly 4,700 Londoners, including those from underrepresented groups, to get industry-relevant green skills that the employers have told us they need. The idea of those hubs is that they have provider partners who will do the training, including new courses in the new technologies that people want, whether it's retrofit or power installation or low carbon transport. And in terms of, sorry, what was your last question?
How does it relate to the Mayor's 2030 net zero targets?
Well, we've talked about the Green New Deal mission, which is the shared mission by many stakeholders in London through the London Recovery Board, which is now the London Partnership Board. And that calls for a doubling of the size of London's green economy. And that means ramping up the thousands of, or the hundreds of thousands of jobs that work in that low carbon and environmental and goods and services sector. So we need those new people or existing people to retrain into the skills that we need to make sure that we're able to deal with the retrofit challenge we have in London, or to help service the new electric vehicles that are coming on stream, to come up with these sort of innovations that we need for moving to that circular economy that we have in London as well.
I'll leave it there, Chairman. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I've had indications from Assemblymember Bukhari and Assemblymember McCartney. If I can just ask, first of all, is there not an implied contract here between iChooser and Get, in terms of if iChooser are introducing a customer to Get UK, is that not an implied contract?
I'm not a lawyer, so I can't say whether that's an implied contract or not, but I certainly feel there's a responsibility between iChooser and Londoners to deliver the service that we commission them to assure and deliver. They have a direct contract, I think, with Get. So, you know, I'm happy to, you know, when we get more information from iChooser and Get, I don't know, Catherine, if you're able to elaborate.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, our contract is with iChooser, and that's why we're holding them to account for the installer that they told us that they did all of the checks on when they were appointed. And we've asked them for detail of those checks. They've told us what was done. We want to see the paperwork. So our contractual relationship is with iChooser. That's who we can legally hold to account. But as the Deputy Mayor said, we really consider them to be responsible for having appointed this company that is underperforming.
Thank you. And Deputy Mayor, if I could come back to you, you said the Mayor was very angry, and I've just heard the phrase, you're going to hold iChooser to account. What does that mean in practice? Because iChooser, I believe, said they run the vigorous vetting process, and that clearly has not been the case, or I would imply has not been the case in this instance. Well, so what does holding to account look like? Well,
that's what we've asked our legal team to have a look at, what our options are, and what does that actually, you know, enable us to do. So that we haven't got that information back yet, but, you know, you presumably they're looking at the contracts to understand what the terms are.
And if Get go bust, you talked about supporting customers in any instance. What does supporting customers look like in practical terms?
Well, as I've said, you know, the first port of call would be to iChooser to say, well, what are you doing about supporting those customers? Because they'll have the information, presumably through their data sharing agreements with Get. But you know, this is a scheme that the Mayor saw was absolutely essential to support Londoners to do the right thing and to get to net zero. So we feel an obligation to support those. So we will make sure that iChooser fulfills their responsibilities and that no customer loses out.
So in a related question, there's a skills gap in London for retrofitting. Are you confident that that skills gap can be completed in order to be able to retrofit and insulate homes? Well,
this is a national challenge. So if you look at Chris Skidmore's net zero review, you know, the various calls from lots of different parties about an industrial strategy. This is something that we and many others have been calling for. We need that national approach to how we're going to develop the skills that are needed to move us to net zero, and we need to do that very fast, which needs some policy certainty about the direction of travel. You know, there are lots of decisions that the government are sitting on that, you know, that people are waiting for so they can decide whether to invest or not. We've had, you know, the stop-start on the Green New Deal where people ramped up to help deliver retrofit, for example, you know, about a decade ago, and then the thing was pulled, so the people that were trained had nowhere to go. So businesses don't feel confident about investing in that, and I'm sure you've heard that at this committee before. So what we're trying to do is to highlight those issues and do what we are able to do. So working on the Green Skills Academies, for example, we've been working with London councils on their retrofit strategy as well to understand what we might be able to do together to support that. We have a London Partnership Board coming up in a few weeks' time, I think, next week, where retrofit and what the challenges are, how collectively we can address that, including supply chain issues, is on the agenda.
So I don't think you'll be surprised to hear me say at all that I agree entirely that the national government need to step up. However, I think if we run the coherence of these two arguments side by side, so we've just heard that there's a supply chain issue with solar, which means that we're struggling to keep up with the demand of where we need to be, and that's really important for net zero. Are we not going to be having the same conversation about insulation in a couple of years' time, where the Mayor's promised us a retrofit revolution? There wasn't a clause there that said a retrofit revolution if I'm supported by national government. So how can he commit to a retrofit revolution, yet we've got this skills gap? And are we not going to have the same gap here that we have with solar?
No, there is absolutely a risk there, which was recognised at the time of writing, I think, the environment strategy, as well as when we talked about the retrofit revolution. So what we've been doing is try to understand what are the various barriers to rolling out, for example, that retrofit approach, or solar, or whatever. And, you know, they're largely the same. One is the skills to do the job. Two is the finance to get those going, and the certainty of finance, and not, you know, a long-term stable policies that people can get on and actually plan for these things. Three is devolution of powers to the mayor or local authority, so they can set standards and move ahead and get on with the things they want to do. So so the mayor, as a strategic authority, can, you know, where he hasn't got the powers, he is doing the convening, like through the London Partnership Board, or working with London councils, or the lobbying of government, where we make the case, and we will be making the case again for the budget, as we have done, and officials have been doing outside of that process. And then where we can, we'll install or institute programmes. So, for example, on retrofit, we knew one of the issues to access finance was having good, detailed feasibility studies and business cases. So we created these net zero accelerators, partly with European funding, and we've now committed funding to extend those in order to create the pipeline of funding projects and go to institutional investors, and they have confidence these are good business cases. So those are things that we're trying to address. The retrofit issue on skills is a massively difficult issue. And again, I was at a round table the other day where the Sustainable Buildings Coalition, where, you know, they've been talking about the challenges as well and identified the same issue. They are struggling too, and we'll be making the case to government about how do we support that skills gap and plug that skills gap.
Thank you, Chair. If I could just mention the Mayor's adult education budget as well, the annual £320 million, where a lot of that has gone towards green skills. In the last complete financial year, that was about 10% of that, supported green skills. And some of that was kind of new green, so things like heat pumps, EV charging points, solar. Some of it was to supporting green skills from existing professions, electricians, builders, accountants, etc., who need to be more in the new green economy.
So I've asked the Mayor about this before, in terms of, yes, there's green skills, but how many of those training providers specifically train in retrofitting? The Mayor said to me at the time that I think it was something like I couldn't expect him to be on top of that detail in the meeting, but he's never written back to me since. I don't know if you do have that detail.
Not with us.
I'll take the action. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Assemblymember Bokhari.
Thank you, Chair. I want to go back to solar together. Can I just clarify? I mean, you mentioned that you're not a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer too. So, and I think many of the customers that have been dealing with this aren't lawyers, and that's why there's the frustration. So, my question is: the company GET, who initially made the contract with them?
My understanding, iChooser.
Okay, and that's where I'm worried, because apparently they were previously directors of Green Energy Solar Publicity, which collapsed in 2019 with debts of £4.4 million, and nobody picked that up.
iChooser have so our contract with iChooser was to make sure that they had the assurance processes in place so when they were contracting with these suppliers. So that was then our contract with them. They then do the assurance of the individual companies. So we have asked why that was the case.
Right, okay. Now, you said the Mayor was angry. A lot of customers are furious right now. I've been looking through, I'm a councillor as well, I've been looking through my emails. I get quite a few on this issue. And one thing that I've been picking up quite a lot recently, which I hope that you can help and pick up as well and put within your analysis and responses to this, is compensation. And apparently there are customers who are having to pay extra in electricity, waiting for installations. They've had cancelled appointments, they've had incorrect work programmes, and on top of that, that extra cost of the extra amount of energy they're having to pay in a time of crisis for a lot of people. The response back has been that they are unable to advise or guarantee that GET will honour the requests of any compensation as they are a third-party independent company. What do they do? What can our residents and customers do? What's your answer to that?
Well, I would look to iChooser in the first place. So if you could share that, I presume that's correspondence between iChooser and you or a company? It's from
iChooser themselves, yes, back to the resident.
Yeah, so do share that with us, but we've been very clear with iChooser that they should be asking the companies to pay compensation and to talk to their customers about what the levels of compensation are. So if that isn't happening, then yes, please do let us know.
This just shows the problem with the issues that we're facing. Customers just don't know what to do. They don't know who to get their help from. They're told to go back and forth all the time. Can they get the mayor to clarify where they get their help from? How can we make sure that the mayor does that? Because it has to be his responsibility to communicate with the residents who've been told that this is the way forward, this is what we should be doing to our homes. He's encouraged this.
Which is absolutely what we've said to iChooser. We don't have access to the customer data, so we need iChooser to communicate to the customers on our behalf and actually on their behalf, because they're the primary contractor. But we have asked for that decision process so that people can understand what to do, where to get a remedy and what to do if they want to pursue a particular course of action, whether it's to get a refund or to pursue an installation with a different supplier or to follow up with a certification agency.
Great. Well, it's not been a good look at the moment, so I hope we do get some clarity and some progress.
And I would want to say to those customers affected, that the mayor, as I've said, is really angry and upset about this, because we know this is the right thing to do. So he's pursuing iChooser to make sure that we deliver this scheme for customers as they expected.
Okay, thank you. I'll forward that email to you.
Please do. Thank you.
Thank you. Assemblymember McCartney.
Thank you, and I think it's quite right that customers do need that decision tree, so that they are not buffeted between supplier and individual contractors. But can I ask you, when you're asking iChooser, and I presume whether it was TfL Legal that oversaw the contracts, that you just can clarify the issue of insurance as well, what insurance is held and where it's held? That would be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, very happy to do that.
Did you want to come in there, Catherine?
I wasn't sure if that was a question for now. I can answer part of it, perhaps. So this question of can customers get their deposits back if they have now heard about the situation, or they're frustrated, they've changed their minds, maybe they're moving, whatever, they want to get their money back, can they do that? So the contract that they have with the installer says that they can cancel at any point and they should get their deposit returned to them within 14 days. If works have already started, then it would be the deposit minus the cost of those works, but they can get the deposit back. In phase 4, customers were only asked to pay a deposit of £150 upon acceptance of the survey. And that is, iChooser have told us that is being held by them in an escrow account. They are therefore directly responsible for it. They've reassured us that that is secure. Customers from phase 4, therefore, who want that deposit back, they can go to GET, they can go to iChooser and ask for that. In phase 5, the conditions were slightly different. So there was a £150 initial down payment, but also a 25% deposit in advance. And that reflected the fact that the installers were incurring sort of increasing inflationary costs to get materials, and they needed money to buy things like the solar panels and the batteries. That 25% deposit is held by the installer, so GET UK or the other two. But it should be covered by an insurance-backed guarantee from the industry body that GET is a member of, which is HIES, which is the Home Insulation and Energy System body. So GET has a contractual obligation in it. When it was appointed to Solar Together, it said it would therefore register all of those deposits with HICE and give customers a certificate of insurance, and that is what customers should look to if they're asking for their deposits back.
Okay, I don't want to go into the legal nitty-gritty, but you said that if work hasn't started, they will get deposit back. If it has started, they will get it back minus works they've completed. But obviously there will be costs with that. A new provider might charge more, or a case that I sent to your office, hadn't turned up 6 times and they'd left scaffolding on the house. Now there's expense in getting that taken down and so forth. So I don't want to see customers such as that being left out of pocket.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Just finally on this section, could I ask you, Deputy Mayor, so Catherine spoke about the 10% the adult education budget, which is pretty huge, that's being spent on green skills. Are you confident that's being spent well in terms of will those green skills aid you in the work that you need to do as Deputy Mayor for Environment?
Yeah, because the team have been looking, not just within the Environment team, but also the Economic Development team and others, to understand what are the skills that, that we want to see in London, and that employers are telling us are needed in London because of the plans, and they see, the market changing and what they want to do. So, I'm confident that's right. But obviously, it's something that we keep an eye on. As the economic context changes, or new things happen, that that we're keeping that refreshed and reviewed.
Thank you. And Catherine, you mentioned writing to me with the more specifics. Could I check, would that be an outline of what suppliers and courses are being counted as that 10% of green skills?
If I may, I'll check with our skills team who are responsible for the adult education budget about just how much work I'm committing them to. But you've asked for how many of them are working on retrofit, and I'm happy to provide that.
Yeah, it's just because it's something I asked for in November, and without sounding impatient, it's been a while. Thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to Assemblymember Cooper, who's not very well, so Assemblymember McCartney is going to be on standby, but hopefully Assemblymember Cooper can get through the section.
Hi, but I might do it with my camera off on the grounds that the rest of you probably want to survive the meeting. And it might be such a horrific thing to look at. I'm really not feeling very well. If I start coughing or sneezing a lot, then I will pass over to Assemblymember McCartney. Just before I move on to asking you about climate budgeting and green bonds, I just wondered if, when you're writing about Solar Together, which we've all received huge amounts of correspondence, could you please set out how large the previous programmes were and whether there were any failures in those? Because my understanding is also this more recent rounds are much bigger than the previous rounds. I wasn't contacted personally by anybody during rounds 1, 2, 3, 4. It's just been this round 5 that seems to have caused problems. And if there are about 400 that are problems, if that's out of 800, that's 50% are going wrong. But if it's out of 4,000, then although that's completely unsatisfactory, that's 10% that's going wrong. And I'd like to kind of get a feel for the percentage that has got wrong. And is it all related just to the one installer? I think it would be useful to know that as well. I don't want you to answer any of those questions now, but if maybe Shirley or Catherine could just nod and say if that contextual information could be supplied so that we've got a better understanding when you send us the details.
Yeah, happy to do that.
Thank you so much. That would be really helpful. And just on London Power, obviously there's the difference between windfalls for people who scrape the energy out of the ground, who are the people who have been making all the money particularly from gas and oil. And those prices have been coming down. We saw a lot of companies fail at one point where the government, Ofgem, had made them freeze the amount they charged customers, but yet they were having to pay more to buy the energy in. Now that situation is changing slightly, it seems to me, and I just wondered if you think there's any chance that sooner than later, certainly they're saying the government who've been giving us all energy support, and I think we do at this point have to credit the government for doing that. I think it's really been helpful for individual consumers and businesses. But do you think those lower costs will start to feed through to Octopus Energy / London Power sooner rather than later, and we might see London Power start marketing sooner than later? Again, that is something that maybe you need to contact Octopus about and could perhaps come back to us on as well. I think that would be really helpful to know. Obviously, it's all been on pause just because for the last year it's all gone to hell in a handbasket, especially looking at this morning's attacks in Ukraine. If I can then move on to my actual questions, and thank you, Chair, for allowing me to just quickly reflect back into those other questions. I wanted to ask you about the climate budgeting and also specifically the green bonds. And I just wondered, obviously, we've been going through the climate budgeting process. How are you ensuring that the opportunities from the GLA estate are maximised, including through GLA land and property? And I'd like to direct that perhaps to Shirley, but I'm sure if Catherine wants to come in, that would be helpful.
Thanks, Assembly Member Cooper. The point of the climate budgeting process, following on from the adoption by the Mayor of the Accelerated Green Pathway for our net zero target, is to understand what we could do, leading by example as the functional bodies in London. And the team, Catherine's team, plus Enver's team, David Galley's team in finance have been working very closely together to help set up that climate budgeting process to really get the functional bodies to start to look at their estate, starting with their estate, for example, and to understand what the opportunities were and what the extent of the problem is going to be in terms of retrofitting for net zero. And I'm really pleased at how enthusiastically the functional bodies have done this. It's a big thing to really sort of understand what the extent of the problem is. And you'll have seen in the budget that we had two tables, which was a sort of table A, what are the sort of projects that we can fund with their existing funding at the moment, and then table B is the rest of it, which has to be funded somehow. And we'll need more work because we've done some very high level work at the cost, but each building will be different, we'll have issues, and we'll need to do, as I talked about earlier, a feasibility study and business case and so on. And those numbers are huge, and I'm really pleased that we've been able to set aside something in the order of about £100 million worth of funding in the functional bodies to take forward projects. But the Table B unfunded measures are in the order of £2 billion just for the functional bodies estate. And of course, if you've seen some of our climate action planning numbers, it's 10 billion to retrofit London, 75 billion to get to net zero across London, I think, and many other numbers as well that, we've not even costed yet. Nobody has the cost of making sure that London is as resilient to the impacts of climate change. So having got that, it's a thing that Mike Bloomberg always says, you can't manage what you don't measure. So having got that information, we understand the problem, the extent of the problem. Now the work is underway with those functional bodies to understand what their plans are to make sure this is incorporated in their budget and into the teams that work at the various organisations, so they can take this forward as part of their normal work programme, their asset maintenance and incorporating into any new developments, where they're doing some large retrofits or refurbishment. And then alongside of that is how do we attract the green finance that we need into London. And the Mayor has helped kickstart that with the funding he's put aside to help promote a green bond. Obviously the market, and I think you've heard this already from Catherine and from Luke as well. The market isn't conducive to a green bond at the moment, but that hasn't stopped us going ahead with getting ready for when it is and looking to see what other sources of finance there might be. And in the meantime, we still try to maximise the amount of funding that we can get from government sources, for example, such as their public sector decarbonisation schemes or their local authority delivery schemes alongside, where we've had some success in attracting funding there as well. So those are all things that we've been doing.
Can I just unpack that a bit?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously, I appreciate that it does need to be done at the sort of functional body level. But my question was about how is the Environment and Energy team ensuring that the opportunities from the GLA estate are maximised, including through GLA land and property, and certainly through oversight, as well as agreeing the Mayor brought forward last year in February the additional money, the 86 million going into the to leverage the money through the green bonds, but also 4 million to be spent on additional staff. So maybe this is where Catherine could unpack this a bit.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that would be people in her team who are helping to ensure that the different functional bodies are able to maximise these opportunities. Could you unpack that a bit more for us? I understand that there's this board that David Bellamy has been chairing. Can you set out for the committee in a bit more detail the work that's gone on for the last year? Are some parts of the functional bodies moving further ahead? Is the fire brigade further ahead than the police? London property further ahead than, and so on and so forth? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I think if you ask the functional bodies, they would say that my team harass them nicely, I hope, but on a very regular basis to ask them about their net zero strategies overall, the projects that they're proposing underneath it, how much they will fund themselves through their own budgets, and that was what was revealed through the climate budgeting, and then not letting them rest on their laurels, but also come up with projects that could be financed out of the Green Finance Programme, and we're in contact with them every week. My team, myself and my managers and I have a meeting with Sam Longman, for example, who's Head of Sustainability at TfL, later this week to go through potential projects that we might be able to support either with our accelerators or later on with green financing. So we're really trying to solicit ideas from them, making it clear how much the Mayor cares about this trajectory, and encouraging them to use different sorts of funding and finance. I think a lot of us in general in the public sector have got quite good at chasing central government grants. We've done that successfully through our accelerator programmes, where we have put in bids for the public sector decarbonisation scheme and attracted hundreds of millions of pounds into London through that. But getting their mindset to think about green finance is just, it takes a bit of time to think about how you write a business case for that and you prove your payback. In terms of what the new staff are doing, we have staff now both in my environment and energy unit, but also in London Treasury. And when I came before Christmas and spoke to this committee about green bonds, I explained that we would be developing our evaluation and selection framework for projects. So people who want to get hold of green finance, how do we decide if their projects are good enough? So that is now being written. That involves environmental criteria, of course, energy use, carbon emission reductions, but also questions about, are these projects scalable? Do they have planning permission? What are the issues and risks on project delivery? And demonstrable experience in actually carrying out capital works. So we are asking that of our project pipeline. What we take to the steering committee on a monthly basis is information about how that pipeline is developing, and what the Deputy Mayor and others are asking us to demonstrate is that month by month we are helping to get ideas from the sort of early twinkle in somebody's eye through to the feasibility study, through to the actual investable business case. And that's what we take to the steering committee. That is internal only within City Hall, but then we also speak really regularly with the functional bodies as well.
Thank you. I mean, one of the things that was notable in the annex to the climate budget is that the majority of the proposals listed there relate to energy, particularly around improving energy efficiency. How are you ensuring that the wider GLA estates improves biodiversity and helps with adaptation, because that's absolutely critical, mitigation and adaptation in terms of climate change? So, for example, tree planting, sustainable urban drainage, and so on, which are perhaps more difficult to package up and find external investment for. You said seeking many sources of finance. I wondered if you could unpack that a bit more. How will that work for that kind of scheme?
In terms of finance? Well, I guess maybe if I start, so that is a difficult one because the investors are, focused on areas where they're going to be able to get a return, an assured return, and their risk is minimised. So they're looking to sort of steady streams of funding, which is usually from energy efficiency for for residential largely or commercial and so on. But that's not to say that we've not also been looking at it. So the teams have been talking to, for example, the Green Finance Institute and many others about what might we do about some of those nature-based solutions and how we might support those, what ideas are there to do that. And there is some movement in that. I think people are starting to understand that there are investment opportunities there, but as ever, and Catherine can probably talk about this much better than I, but the criteria for how they invest, how they assure themselves of the savings, what is their interest out of it is still very at an early stage. So it's not something that we can, I think, guarantee that we're going to be seeing a steady stream of finance coming in. A number of organisations, I think, are looking at offset schemes and things like that. And I think what we're looking at and really at focusing is making sure that all the functional bodies and beyond really are thinking about these issues, both biodiversity and climate adaptation, and so that they have the plans and the projects ready, so that when the finance and to remind people this is a huge area to invest in, and is a necessary area to invest in. So again, making sure that pipeline is starting to be ready, which starts with that policy direction and leadership.
But for me, it's sort of, I mean, obviously that's very, pertinent. It's quite hard to see what the return on your investment would be for planting a tree, although the environmental benefits are huge. Does that mean that we need to be working with local authorities and also on, what they spend their carbon offset funding on, rather than putting it into perhaps solar, which does create an obvious ROI? Should we be asking them to do carbon offset in terms of biodiversity? And should we be thinking about asking local authorities and having those discussions about what they spend SIL and mayoral SIL gets spent on? Should it be being directed towards things that couldn't achieve external funding in the way that we've just been discussing?
I think that's right, but we're not even getting the funding in for the energy efficiency. So I think where people are looking at, so the sort of criteria people look at is, and certainly at the moment because of the cost of living, is will this help on a number of fronts, and more directly in terms of saving people's energy bills, and therefore and help them that way. But in the medium to longer term, then absolutely, we're looking to see how we might help, not just us, but with many of the organisations that we work with across London on options like could the offset funding be used for different purposes, and we've seen some of this starting to happen elsewhere. There are obviously pluses and minuses in doing that.
Sure. It's good to see the solar membrane on the London Stadium as being prioritised.
Yep.
What other funded projects from the climate budget are likely to be prioritised during the year ahead, or is that something you've not yet decided? Maybe Catherine.
Yeah, thanks. So that's one where we're very explicitly supporting its development through the contribution towards the feasibility study for the solar membrane. We're also talking to the functional bodies about their applications to the public sector decarbonisation scheme, where we hope that we're still waiting for an announcement from central government, but when that news comes out, we expect that they will get partial funding for some of their projects, and that might be something where the Green Finance Programme can then lend in to support the other part of those projects.
Let's cut to the chase. When do we actually expect to be in a position to use green bonds? When are we actually going to go to the bond market and buy some money, effectively? I mean, I know that you're talking about the ULEZ cameras being the first project, because they obviously will create some money will come in from them, just as the last two expansions created some income. But when are we going to be launching green bonds, and what will be the next most likely project after the ULEZ cameras?
Yeah, do you want to do it?
Thanks. But perhaps it's useful just to distinguish between the investments from the Green Finance Programme and how we raise the money for it. And I think Luke Webster, our head of London Treasury, came and explained this probably more articulately than I can. He came just before Christmas, but to summarise that again, we do have in pool balances the ability to start making these investments and then to refinance by issuing a green bond at the moment where we think that the market is right. At the moment, it just wouldn't bring us a saving if we went to the market now because of the recent turbulence that we've seen. a critical question for us is raising money through a green bond a better value than going to the Public Works Loan Board? If it isn't, we would just go to them to raise this finance. But the separate question of do we have projects to invest in, they're starting to come through, but as I said, you have to move them from the twinkle in the eye to the feasibility study to the investable business case. We do not have any yet where we have been able to say we are announcing this, with the exception of the contribution towards the ULEZ cameras. But that's our task to work on it. I think on the PSDS projects, we had hoped to hear from central government in January. They said they would announce those projects by the end of January. It's now March. So as soon as we hear that, we will be able to go to the functional bodies and potentially make an offer for co-financing of those projects.
And just to add as well, we still do have the Mayor's Energy Efficiency Fund, which the Mayor has added to. That's going very, very well. We've had lots of projects funded through that, and we can certainly send you some information on what has been funded. But the point of that is, as it's used up, then we want to look to more private finance coming in, which is the point of the Mayor bringing forward the 90 million in order to I can't think of the word, to encourage the bond market to respond. The turbulence from late last summer with the previous Prime Minister and Exchequer's tanking of the economy didn't really help the bond market, which is why we have to take a much more prudent approach and looking to the sort of financing approach that Catherine and Luke have outlined. But as soon as that the economic situation and context is favourable, then we will be looking to do that.
Okay, so at the moment it's still in the balance as to whether or not the green bonds are better value than going to the Public Works Loans Board, so we're not going to be launching them anytime soon, is my interpretation of what you're saying. But Chair, I think I've probably pressed these points as far as I can, and I'd like to thank the Deputy Mayor and the Assistant Director for their help with the answers, and I almost got through without coughing there. Thank you.
Thanks, Assemblymember Cooper, and get well soon. Our last section before we take a break is the Mayor's 2030 ambitions and implications for emission zones with Assemblymember Best.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to start, Deputy Mayor, by asking you if I'm sure you've seen the news on Launders Lane and the Pfizer. Have you visited the site?
I haven't, no.
Will you commit to going down there and visiting?
I'm happy to visit, but I think we've been involved through officers, I think, to understand what the situation is then, trying to help the local authority work with the Environment Agency to resolve the situation. And I know we've had meetings here quite a while ago with Dr. Sahota, had convened a meeting where we helped out as well. I think it was before your time, actually, Catherine. So I'm looking to you, Elliot, because I can't remember really.
I was going to ask who has been leading on that. Has that been Elliot yourself?
Previously, I think under Elliot's previous role.
Yeah, this was when I was still involved in the environment team. So it had been convening with the Environment Agency, which was taking place. And I think they were the lead responsible for it.
Okay. Do you know when the last correspondence was?
Between the Environment Agency,
ourselves, and Havering Council, or
I couldn't tell you offhand, but I can find out.
Have we spoken to them recently off the back of this renewed call for help?
I haven't, no.
Okay, because they've set up a task force, obviously, which includes the Environment Agency, council officers, councillors, and the local MP. But the GLA isn't involved in that. Could we ask to be a part of that task force?
Well, we're very happy to help mediate and facilitate a resolution, but I think just understanding that we don't have the powers to intervene, and that really is down to the local authority and the Environment Agency. And I know the fire brigade have been involved because of all the fires there as well. So yeah, very happy to try and lend some support there.
Excellent. Turning back to, we can turn on to the ULEZ now, as I'm sure you expect. What are the next steps on emission zones? What scenarios are you examining for achieving the 27% emission reductions in road and transport? And Elliot and Catherine, if you wanted to come in as well after Shirley to talk about how the environment and energy team are helping to prepare.
So on road transport emissions specifically, Transport for London are looking to work out what the options and pathway might be for reaching that net zero by 2030 target. but we've talked about this before. You know, we had a net zero target in the transport strategy and in the environment strategy for 2050. The Mayor's brought that forward because of the urgency of the climate emergency. And if you remember, within the strategy there was a sort of S diagram which set out a number of no regret actions that have to be taken anyway, and similarly when we published the Element Energy report that looked at 4 scenarios, and then Sadiq selected the accelerated green one as being the sort of most pragmatic one, again the options in terms of sort of potential actions that could be taken that need to be looked at in more detail and more feasibility are all set out there. And so the things that we can do and have been going on with are, for example, electrification. So policies to make sure the taxi fleet, the bus fleet are moving to electrify as soon as possible, that the infrastructure is going in order to help.
Can I just clarify something quickly, because the questions around the reductions in traffic, does that include, so there's electrification,
Sorry, say again?
The question was around achieving the 27% reductions from road transport.
Vehicle kilometres.
When we're talking about bringing road transport down, are you excluding electric vehicles from that?
What we're trying to make sure is that the amount of traffic that's on the road, which is causing the congestion in London, that we see fewer vehicles in order to make space for the essential vehicles, and for those essential vehicles then to be electrified, so that those people who aren't able to use public transport, for example, need to drive, at some point, that we would like their vehicles to be electrified. For those buses that are carrying people around, we want those to be electrified. For those vans that are servicing our shops or our homes, that they're electrified. And that's the approach in terms of electrification. So it's absolutely about mode shift. We've got to get people off the roads and into public transport and active transportation. And then there's a strategy target, MTS strategy target of 80%, I think, by 2041. And then the remaining trips to be electrified as quickly as possible. So the way to get the emissions reductions is by reducing partly the mode shift, but also reducing vehicle kilometres. And that's through a number of things, from policies around incentivising people to use their car less, to use public transport more, active transportation like the school cycle lanes and so on. And then for those vehicles that have to be on the road, how do you make them and support them to be electric, which goes to the electric vehicle infrastructure that we're putting in, working with the local authorities and so on.
And maybe just to add, my team in particular on the transport side obviously is doing a huge amount of work around the Mayor's transport strategy, and just building on the point that Shirley was talking about, clearly one of the key things that we also need to continue supporting is making sure there's the right public transport capacity in place. Obviously a huge success in terms of the Elizabeth line. There's additional work which is going on in the context of the funding settlement, as you're aware, but also keeping the door open on things like Crossrail 2. Huge investment in buses, particularly now to London, is going to be a priority as well, and you'll have heard about the extra 2 million kilometres of buses that the Mayor's very interested in. And also Shirley touched on walking and cycling, which again we've seen some really positive results recently thanks to the investments we've been making in safer cycling infrastructure, plus also in things like school streets, which have made it easier and safer to walk and cycle, and we're seeing the corresponding increases now in walking and cycling rates.
Thanks. Elliot, before Catherine comes back on that, just do you accept then that extension to the bus routes to 2 million kilometres, do you accept that creates a 0.01% change?
So it's part of a wider package of long-term improvements that we need to make.
Do you accept that it's a 0.01% change?
I'd have to double-check percentages. I've not actually looked at it in that way.
I'd imagine that you would have that percentage.
I can absolutely check and come back to you on it.
Because that's obviously been a well-publicised figure now, 0.01%. If you're not challenging that figure, I would suggest that it's because you accept that it's correct.
I'll happily come back to you on it.
Because if I was in your position and someone was saying that and it wasn't, I would be out here
today. Chair, the officer's
well,
already said that we'll come back. So I think if you could accept that would be helpful.
I think that figure must be known, is all I'm suggesting. So, and I'm saying if I knew that figure, I'd want to challenge it if it wasn't correct. So it's disappointing that it seems it is correct, that there'll only be a 0.01% change.
I think that's your assumption. We'll definitely come back and confirm.
Just on the main question, did you want?
That's fine. I mean, you asked about the contribution to the net zero pathways. That report on
But specifically on vehicle kilometres or
It's
generally?
it's specifically on the 27% reduction, emissions reductions in road transport.
So that report by Element Energy makes assumptions both about the electrification, but also still that you have to reduce the amount of vehicle kilometres travelled. And there are obviously benefits for air quality, not just for carbon emissions, of reducing vehicle kilometres. I say that as somebody who drives an electric vehicle and felt proud of myself until I spent more time with the air quality team and discovered that I'm still contributing to the problem.
Yeah, and that's perhaps why I wanted to see the clear distinction in how we were looking at that. The average reduction in nitrogen dioxide pollution from the ULEZ phases was estimated to be 21% in Inner London from the 12-month on report.
Mm-hmm.
Given that much of this improvement came from further compliance before the expanded ULEZ went live, but after it was announced, is there any indications this is already happening in Outer London since the announcement of the London-wide ULEZ?
If the trend is following what happened to Central and Inner, I think we would hope to see people pre-complying before the extension goes in on the 29th of August. And that's really what the focus is at the moment. Is, you know, you'll have seen a lot of the advertising, the work around the scrappage scheme is to help people to get ready before the scheme comes in and to be compliant.
But is there any indication?
We haven't got any reports yet, but, you know, as and when we get the data, we'll be very happy to share that with you.
Do you expect to be getting some data?
Yes, of course. You know, we want to know what's going to be coming up.
So when do you think that will be ready?
I don't have that data. That comes via TfL, so I'd have to ask them.
Elliot?
I think, again, happy to pick up with TfL. I think that will also partly depend on when the camera network goes in, which, of course, in Outer London, as that's developed further, will give us a better understanding of the vehicle fleet and how it's changing.
Thanks. And just to ask, maybe, I don't know if it's best for you, Elliot, or Catherine, but could you please send us the raw data which you and the Mayor have been using for your ULEZ reports?
That's all.
I think that's basically all included, but if there's anything you think is missing, I'm sure absolutely happy for that to be shared.
And could you please send us your estimates and methodology for CO2, PM 2.5 and NOx levels across London since 2016?
Absolutely, happy to do that.
Thank you. And just, Shirley, come back to you. Do you recognise that according to the ULEZ 1 year on report, Outer London still has better air quality than Inner London, despite not being part of the ULEZ?
What I recognise is the rate in air pollution dropping in Outer London is half of that in Central London. I recognise that there are 5 million Londoners in Outer London who are not breathing as clean air as people in Central and Inner London.
That's not true, though. It's just to say that the air quality is better in Outer London than Inner London.
If you take a point, yes, but when you're looking at it, and Elliot is probably better at talking about this generally, is that that air pollution is there. We are not meeting WHO targets. In some places, we're not even meeting the government's own targets, and that's why we're expanding the ultra-low emission zone. So whilst there may be some areas who think that they're cleaner, the air pollution is still toxic. There is no safe level of air pollution. The WHO say that, the CMO says that. These are all leading to higher risks of, a whole host of diseases, and I could list them all. And the Mayor doesn't think that's acceptable for any London, let alone those in Outer London who haven't had the benefit of the expansion of the ultra-low emission zone.
You talk about benefit. Can I talk you through the benefit of the ULEZ in my region of London, where I come from? That's forecasted to have, the expanded ULEZ is forecast to have a 0.0% change on PM 2.5 and a negligible 0.01% change on nitrogen oxide. We aren't getting any of the new buses that have been announced. I think we're going to talk in future about the fact that the tree planting is failing, and the scrappage scheme is so narrow that no residents, not many residents can access it. Mm-hmm. So how are we benefiting? Because we're not getting an effect on the air pollution change, which I agree with you, I'd like to see better, but we're not having any effect. It says it in TfL's only assessment report, and we're not really benefiting from anything else in the Mayor's policy. The only thing it's doing is harming those that are older, tend to be older and have older vehicles, self-made business people that have got older vans that they can't switch. That's what we've got. So where's our benefit?
Well, the report, the consultation report, and then the Mayor's report, when he confirmed his decision, was very clear that you will be getting benefits in Outer London. Those 5 million Londoners will be breathing cleaner air. The 1,700 plus schools and care homes and hospitals.
Shirley, it's in TfL's own assessment. In my part of London, there'll be a 0.0% change.
So when you're comparing percentages, and Elliot can probably talk you through this, there, the percentages may look small, but the absolute numbers are huge, which is why I'm talking about the numbers of people whose exposure is reduced, the number of people who are going to benefit from this, and the number of schools and hospitals. So you can selectively pick statistics around percentages to show the differences haven't been great, but actually on the ground this is going to make a huge difference to numbers of people.
I'm not selectively picking, it's where I live, it's the people I speak to that are going to be hammered by this, but they're going to have no effect. It's not selective picking, it's real life.
Well,
so maybe if I just jump in, if you look, there's a 99.9% of Londoners see an improvement in air quality as a result of the ULEZ being introduced. Obviously, I completely take your point around PM2.5. I think that reflects specific aspects of how PM2.5 pollution is generated. And obviously, if you look at where road transport is a more dominant source, that's where you see those benefits in terms of NO2. And particularly in terms of car emissions in Outer London, NOx emissions are expected to reduce by about 10%, which is a very significant and impactful reduction.
Again, Elliot, not in the area that I'm talking about. And these are the people that will be paying the penalty, but they're not seeing any improvement in their air quality.
But I think that's what overall is set out, is that everyone should be seeing those improvements. That is where the 5 million number also comes from, in terms of the scale of improvement that you'll see for the majority of people, absolute vast majority of people living in Outer London.
But again, not in TfL's own assessment. Just, Shirley, to come back to you, do all scientists believe that ULEZ has been significantly effective in central and inner London?
I'm not quite sure what you mean by all scientists.
Do all scientists, do all the reports that have come out, does every supporting bit of evidence say that ULEZ has been effective?
Well, the Imperial College, who have been doing the analysis and the evaluation, who are world-leading experts on air pollution, who are members of COMIAP or former members of COMIAP, the government's committee on expert committee on air pollution. We've had very many people talking about how the science shows that ULEZ has had a dramatic impact on central and inner London in terms of emissions reductions, and there are various studies that others have done about the health impacts.
Should I repeat the question again, Shirley? Just do all scientific reports that have been laid out and peer-reviewed agree that the ULEZ has had a significant effect in central and inner London?
Well, if you want to list every scientific report that you're referring to, then I can go through them one by one and either write to you afterwards. But, I'm not going to give you a categorical, because I don't quite know what you're trying to say. Are you saying there's a scientific report that says it doesn't, in which case tell me what it is and I can tell you what it is?
Yeah, it's the IOP report doesn't agree.
The IO?
So I'm not sure which report you're referring to.
It was actually a report that was quoted to you on Sky News, Shirley. So I would, and you.
The IOP report.
Yeah.
Who are?
I can get you the exact name if you want, but you did talk about it on Sky News, so I would have presumed that
if you're talking
were
about
familiar with it.
No, please do. I'd like to know what you're asking me.
Okay, I'll send you the IOP report by Liang Ma et al. In 2021. They found that the ULEZ hadn't been very effective and the casual effects were very small.
So I think it might be helpful if I jump in here. One thing that we have noticed is, in terms of the ULEZ, to understand its impact, you do need to look at pre-compliance. It's absolutely critical. In the same way, for example, TfL prepared its bus fleet for ULEZ over a number of years in terms of making sure that they met the Euro 6 standard. Many other businesses and individuals take action to prepare. And in looking at and assessing the impacts of a scheme, it's really important to take that into account. If you look at what is a very well-respected institution like Imperial, who have done a peer-reviewed process looking at some of the work that we've done, you can see that they absolutely recognise the world-leading impact that the ULEZ has had transforming air quality in London.
It was an Imperial study, sorry.
It wasn't.
It was an Imperial.
Is this I think you might be referring to the Mark Stettler piece of work that was done by Imperial, but again, that same explanation that I just gave there is the case, is that they were looking at a 5 to 8 week window and saying that if you just look at that window, that is the only impact that ULEZ had. Clearly, that is not the way to assess the scheme, whereas I said you're going to get significant pre-compliance benefits. One example being TfL's own work on buses, others being commercial fleets preparing well in advance of the scheme's introduction.
Thanks. But it does suggest that it's something we should look at, isn't it? That it's not clearly all scientific research points to it being an agreed.
It sounds a little bit like the climate science deniers, who were saying,
I'm not sure.
Were saying 99.9% just because.
Hang on, Shirley, because no, that's not fair.
It's completely fair. You are equating one study and trying to
because
dismiss
you're saying by saying, hang on, sorry,
on air pollution.
No, Shirley,
exactly
I won't have it.
Happened.
Stop right now. You cannot say when I'm saying that a policy doesn't work that it makes it be a climate change denier. Those are two separate things. So let's have a grown-up debate, okay? Don't be better than the mayor.
That wasn't what I was saying.
No, you did. You just said it sounds like climate change denier. So can you go back? Make that point, but don't say you're a climate change denier because I'm questioning the policy.
I did not say that. I said
it sounds like a climate change denier.
So we're not talking over each other. Do you want to clarify your remarks, Deputy Mayor?
I said it sounds like those people who denied climate science, the ones that say there's just because there is one scientist, the 99.9% of scientists who are absolutely in agreement that climate change is happening. And it's that misinformation, disinformation that is getting out there that really is causing harm to people because, it discredits scientists who spend their working lives behind this, and it's also harming people because then they're starting to get confused about who should they trust about their information. Then they go to get information from ridiculous sources. We've seen that through the COVID situation, and that is not helpful.
Are imperial or ridiculous source?
I'm saying that the quoting one study and then saying the rest of the studies don't count is wrong.
So I don't think I did say that. I just asked if you were looking at all the studies in the round, and you then equated that with climate denial, and you've said that people would be then looking at going to ridiculous sources. I'm quoting from the same institute that you are.
So maybe I can jump in a bit there. So the part that Imperial did that report is, I believe, in the School of Engineering. And the expertise in terms of air quality and understanding the complex effects that it has actually sits in their environmental research group. And when you talk to the people in the environmental research group, they share the scepticism around some of the assumptions and some of the conclusions made by that report. But to reassure you, we do look at all of these reports and obviously taken, any feedback on board, but clearly in this case, we just don't think that it properly reflects the full scale and impact of the scheme.
Thanks, Elliot. The Mayor recently announced with the Mayor of Milan a C40 initiative on air pollution, including working to implement zero emission zones by 2030.
Yeah.
What plans are there to implement zero emission zones in London?
There is a policy in the Mayor's transport strategy that we have been working to in terms of understanding how that might work in London. We've been trying to support local authorities who want to do that, so very many from central London, from I think Hackney, Islington, the Corporation of London have all expressed interest in these areas. But at the moment we are completely focused on implementing the ultra-low emission zone in August, and as I've said before, I think essentially the central London area is a zero emission zone because you have to pay a congestion charge unless you are an electric vehicle or zero emission vehicle. So to that end, that is a stepping stone towards what might be needed to meet the 27% vehicle kilometre reduction that we've talked about. But we have no proposals on the table for a zero emission zone at the moment. We're focused on the air pollution reduction that we need to see in London to protect Londoners' health.
And if people are looking to replace their vehicles to be ULEZ compliant, is there information available to ensure that their future vehicle purchase is compliant with future road user charging schemes and emission zones in London?
I'm not quite sure what you're asking. There are no plans or proposals, so we can't tell you what.
If people are looking to replace their vehicles to be ULEZ compliant, is there any information available to ensure that their future vehicles or their future vehicle is compliant with any future schemes.
So I think perhaps it's just worth pointing to the TfL vehicle checker, which of course is the main tool that's available for people to check if their vehicle is ULEZ compliant.
And is there any information that they're being given to make sure that any future schemes, that vehicle would be exempt?
Are you asking whether the future scheme standards are going to change?
Yeah.
The Mayor has said no.
And perhaps if there was any scheme, I don't know, is there any kind of information around is electric the best way to go, or is there any information?
I think we've already talked about this. Like from a calm point of view, from an air quality point of view, we want to make sure that those vehicles that are in London in order to meet that net zero by 2030 target and the WHO targets and so on, that we really need to be saying fewer of those vehicles on the road, hence the 80% target by 2041, and the rest of the vehicles to move to electrified vehicles over time.
Thanks, Shirley. And do you know when the cameras for the ULEZ expansion was purchased?
I don't actually, no. I mean, I know we've talked about this and the Mayor has talked about this. The Transport for London put a precautionary order in case the scheme was confirmed so that we could keep to the timetable, but that's a matter of record.
So the fact that they were ordered before the consultation even began, do you not find that strange?
Not really, no.
You don't think so?
It's a matter of, people do this all the time to make sure that things are ready. So you put something on that you can cancel just in case. There are very long lead-in times for the supply chain for cameras and for lots of other components. So we just needed to make sure that the supply chain was there.
Do you think that's a message that would cut through with Londoners? Do you think people would understand?
Well, if people portrayed it as being unhelpful,
hang on,
yes,
I'm just asking.
than...
Hang on, I'm just asking a question.
Okay.
Thanks. If you were to hear that you're being asked to take part in a consultation, but there's already a pre-order on the thing that you're consulting about, do you think that that would sit well with people?
I think people think that was a sensible way of making sure that people were ready for a decision.
Really?
Yeah.
You think that people would, if they were really, especially if they were opposed to the idea, the fact that the thing that they're opposed to has already been ordered?
No, I think they want to make sure that there was effective use of money, and if the cameras could be cancelled, which I think the order was placed on that basis, then that's sensible planning and making sure that the resources are used efficiently at Transport for London and not wasted.
So the cameras could have been cancelled?
I think if it's okay, I'm going to jump in here. This is potentially the subject of judicial review, and as a result, I don't think it's really appropriate for the Deputy Mayor to provide more commentary. I think it's been covered in previous meetings as well.
Thanks, Elliot. How many complaints, Shirley, have you, the Mayor and TfL received in relation to the ULEZ expansion?
Complaints? I couldn't tell you. I'm not quite sure. Do you mean letters into the Mayor or emails or...?
Letters, emails, phone calls. I'm sure, it's been logged. I'm sure that the mayoral correspondence is logged.
I'm sure it is, but I don't have that number. And I'm not even sure they sort it by complaints. I think they just sort it by topic.
So we'd get information, for example, if the topic was on air quality, for example, so we could sort correspondence by that and provide some kind of update accordingly. But
we could tell you the numbers of correspondence on the ULEZ. We couldn't tell you there were complaints.
Complaints or not, it's not how the system's set up, I'm afraid.
Right. So if someone makes an official complaint, so for example, I know people are complaining now about installation of cameras on their streets and being unhappy. That would be an official complaint, I suppose, that they're making? Is there not a way in which that?
Not that I know of, but I could find out from our correspondence unit or whoever that looks at that.
If you could, that'd be helpful. Thank you. One of the features of the ULEZ is that it's a daily fee. What experience have you gained from the previous phases of ULEZ and the congestion charge about understanding the impact of a daily charge on behaviour?
Well, okay, there's probably very good research on this, which I don't have to hand, and we could probably get to you. But, if you look at how a daily charge on whether it's... well, certainly on the ultra-low emission zone that happened in central London, then you'd seen the levels of compliance have shot up, and the consequent emissions reductions and traffic reduction, and the fewer number of polluting vehicles in that central and inner London zone is testament to the effectiveness of that daily charge. I think there's other research that that would show that too. But, you know, I'd have to go back to you really on and cite some of that research, whether we've done that research or whether others have done. I'm sure there are lots of learned transport organisations that have done lots of assessments of the impacts of financial incentives and disincentives on behaviour change.
I was just going to echo that. Obviously, we've seen the effectiveness of these schemes, which have had a transformative impact. Obviously, I think Christina Calderata was speaking last week to the Transport Committee, and I know that they've been diving into some of these questions in more detail, and obviously TfL have more of that expertise in terms of understanding the impacts of these kind of schemes on behaviour more widely. I'm not sure if there's anything that she has shared with them, but again, happy to take that away and have a look and come back.
Thanks. I think, if you could write back, that would be helpful for the committee. Much of the messaging around alternatives is focused on public transport provision, particularly bus routes. What steps are being taken to ensure that shared mobility alternatives available in inner London, such as car clubs and micro-mobility, are available to the same extent in outer London as inner London?
That's absolutely part of the alternatives that Transport for London are promoting. Certainly some of the third-party offers that are available through the scrappage scheme, and they're not just for people who qualify for scrappage, but they're also available for the general public. Details are on the Transport for London website. Promote car clubs, micro-mobility, sort of discounts on cargo bikes. I'm sure Hina will come in on that, and other electric scooters and things like that, yeah.
Absolutely, and there's been some really good work going on between Transport for London and Como UK, who are the kind of the trade body for car clubs and London councils, to work to see what more can be done to support what is, as you say, potentially an important policy area to provide better alternatives to people, not just including public transport, but as you say, if someone wants to do a weekly shop, you're going to do a big trip to IKEA, whatever it might be, a weekend away, car clubs can provide that flexibility. So absolutely, that's part of the policy mix. I think it's also a very good fit for outer London for various reasons, and TfL having those conversations to try and support the car clubs to improve their provision and services with the boroughs in outer London.
Thanks, Shirley. You said that part of that third-party offer included e-scooters just then.
Sorry,
You said e-scooters.
I think so, yeah. Have you got a list?
I do have a list.
Is that...
Just check.
I mean,
So we've got car van club offers, car van rental offers, car van minibus motorbike finance, car subscription, e-bike, bike, e-cargo and cargo bike purchases. And so there are exclusive offers.
So not e-scooters. I was just checking because I thought you did say e-scooters before, and I thought that would be a bit strange if we were encouraging people to do something that was illegal.
You wouldn't get me on an e-scooter.
Okay, that makes more sense then. Right. I just wanted to ask as well about the judicial review that you mentioned, Elliot. Mm-hmm. What is the contingency if it is ruled that the expansion cannot go ahead?
I think we can't.
I hate to do this. I don't think we can talk about the judicial review.
So if there was, if the ULEZ didn't go ahead, hypothetically for any reason, would there be a plan B of what we could do with that money? For example, electrifying the bus fleet.
I'm going to ask your indulgence, Chair, and just remind people, because there's a judicial review, we can't really talk about this. So,
if there was, but I'm suggesting, is there any plan B? Just in general, it's not about...
I think we've heard the answer that because of the judicial review, we're not going to get answers there.
Okay, but if we take it away from the judicial review, just to ask hypothetically, is there a plan B?
I imagine Deputy Mayor said she's not going to answer hypothetical questions, but
Thank you
Deputy Mayor's nodding at me.
Yes.
So it's not a plan B. Okay. I just wanted to finally, one last question, ask what you made, Deputy Mayor, of the letter from Hounslow's Labour Council asking to be exempt from the very ULEZ that they're supportive of.
I think all local authorities are under huge pressure and challenges in trying to deal with their day-to-day business, but also with the challenges of moving to net zero. Transport for London, I think, in the consultation report, looked at a number of organisations who sought for exemptions, and we looked carefully at lots of things. And the exemptions that we've settled on are the ones that we think are the right mitigations for the ultra-low emission zone coming in August.
So what did you make of their particular ask?
Well, I think if you don't ask, you don't get, do you? But they didn't get.
Do you think it's strange to perhaps ask for exemption yourself whilst being happy to pass it on? Because like you said, local authorities are under severe pressure, but so are a number of other industries that are going to be hammered by the ULEZ. Do you think that it's a bit hypocritical to support it on one end, but also be asking for an exemption?
I'm sure they had their reasons.
Probably not very good ones then, I'm supposing, but thank you.
Thank you. So we have 10 minutes before the break, and I have indications from Assemblymember Bukhari, Devonish and Clark. I just have two quick questions.
Yeah.
Elliot, you mentioned that the camera compliance is one way, the cameras is one way that you're going to measure compliance. If councils block cameras, is that going to make it more difficult to assess the impact of ULEZ?
Again, I'm going to be slightly cautious because of the JR, but obviously we expect the cameras to go in, and as they go in, we expect to be able to have to improve our understanding of the vehicle fleet through that. And, work is underway that TfL is leading to ensure that installation can take place.
Thank you. And my final question in this section, Deputy Mayor, I chair the Environment Committee, but as a Green London Assembly member, I can't support ULEZ anymore with the caveats of we need more scrappage on top of that. I think all the arguments you made today are absolutely right around air pollution, health pollution, reducing traffic. As Deputy Mayor to the Mayor, though, is it not very difficult to defend the building of a Silvertown road tunnel when essentially we need to be reducing air pollution, we need to get people out of their cars onto bikes, but we're building more roads? It's incoherent, isn't it?
It's not incoherent, and you'll have heard the Mayor, and I've also talked about this many times before. It is not inconsistent. The point of the Silvertown Tunnel is enabling access for a part of London that doesn't have cross-river access as much as West London. There are road user charges on the tunnel itself and neighbouring tunnels that will enable the traffic to be maintained at a level that was set out in the modelling forecasts, and we don't anticipate any changes in air pollution and carbon emissions because of that. There are cross-river buses that Transport for London are implementing. I could go on, but I'm sure you've heard this before. So no, I don't think so.
We have had this conversation before, but it just does really strike me, especially in the context of ULEZ, that we're talking about cross-river buses, we're talking about more walking and cycling. Surely those are the answers here, and not to build a new road. Like, why not just do those things? Have more buses, have more walking, have more cycling, less congestion, less air pollution, more in line with the whole strategy around the ULEZ.
Well, I think that the approach we've taken for the tunnel, not a road, is precisely that. It's going to help people access jobs, leisure across London in a way, because of the ULEZ is already there and then it's expanding. They will be ULEZ compliant, and the charges will make sure that that the road traffic is minimised as far as possible.
I could go on, but I will be sensible. Assemblymember Bukhari.
I'll go on your behalf.
Thank
Yes,
you.
more roads mean more cars, which is why we are against the Silvertown Tunnel. But I'm going to talk about another issue. It's about the Liberal Democrat position on the lead-in time being at a rate that has caused problems, actually, in terms of the messaging. And that was our main concern. We're not delaying for that reason. That's the word we've been using is a lead-in time, because the messaging hasn't been working. And I say this with great concern, and I say this with my Conservative colleagues who are sitting next to me, who are currently putting leaflets through the doors in Hounslow in a by-election right now, where it says ULEZ could cost you £12.50 a day to use your car. That's it. Now, that is the problem. The messaging could have been fixed a lot earlier. We could have had a lot more messaging to make sure that people understood clearly what ULEZ meant. And we've now got these misleading leaflets going through doors, which is causing a lot of upset. It's causing tension. And what should have been, what the Mayor has been saying in his book, that he wants cross-party approaches to tackling air pollution, has now ended up being not. And it's been really, really terrible in terms of messaging. And my concern is, will you consider having a different approach and maybe a longer lead-in time? And has the Mayor considered doing that at all?
I'm going to quote the JR again. So I'm afraid we can't really talk about what was on or in or whatever, because it's all subject to the judicial review. So until we can talk about, until that's over, we can't really talk about the whys and wherefores about it. But if you're talking about
I don't know how
messaging,
that is part of the judicial review. It's whether the Mayor would consider a longer lead-in time.
because you've been asking, because you're asking about the decision-making process, which is...
And would you agree that the messaging hasn't worked?
Because that's subject to the judicial review, I can't talk about it.
Okay, so would the Mayor reconsider his position on increasing the scrappage scheme?
I think we've been through that at the budget.
So
So what he's asked for is support from Assembly members around the table and from MPs and others to get government to support Londoners with a bigger scrappage scheme, and people outside of London as well, those in the home counties and beyond, to help us. He's got a limited amount of money.
He's got enough money in his reserves. We know that.
And I think he talked about the reserves being needed to deal with the inflationary pressures and the uncertain economic situation we're in. So if you're going to be a prudent financial manager of TfL resources, you have to keep those reserves.
If the Mayor of London does use his reserves at some point using a different reason, and probably won't say it's because of the Lib Dems, he'll probably say it's his idea, and say that yes, we will increase the scrappage scheme, I'll be very happy. I think that London would be very happy. We'd all be very happy. Would you be happy?
I'd be really happy if government gave us the same support that they're giving to lots of cities
I agree,
outside.
but we're in this place where we're fighting each other, and politics has taken over. The end game here is to make sure that we have got clean air.
And that's
politics
right.
and politicians, and I'm going to say that, we've got in the way of this. We've got to rise above it. I'm getting frustrated by it. I'm sure people who are campaigning on the streets, who have been saying that their children are dying because of air pollution, are frustrated by this. When are we going to get above this?
I totally endorse the Liberal Democrats, the Conservative Party and the Greens getting behind the Mayor and focusing on the ultra-low emission zone, getting it expanded and implemented on the 29th of August. As you say, good messaging.
Okay, I'm going to leave it at that. I'm getting more and more frustrated. So
You've got a clip of the Deputy Mayor saying, I endorse the Liberal Democrats. You could just stop with
I think I'll leave it there. I'll clip it, I'll tweet it. I'll just do two very quick points. When is the cargo bite strategy going to be finished? Because we still haven't got a date for that.
I don't know if you know anything about that. No, but
no idea.
No, we'll write to you.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I know. The Cycling Commissioner said he had no idea as well. And wood burning. Why aren't we talking about it? For goodness sake. I mean, I've not seen any tweets. I've not seen any social media. The Mayor of London said that he's doing task groups in the councils. Well, I've asked my local council about this task group. They're not doing anything. Where's the support? We should be talking about a major problem for air pollution than we are right now.
So we are. You may have seen, for example, the air quality guidance that came out, air quality neutral and air quality positive. That essentially bans new wood burning in new developments, and that's using the power that the Mayor has through the London Plan. The Mayor has no other powers on wood burning, and the powers that local authorities have, as you know, are so limited. We did a lot of work in trying to persuade the government through the Environment Act to change the legislation to devolve the ability to local authorities to do that, and government chose not to do that. You know, local authorities are going out and having to enforce at night to see if there's smoke coming out. It's absolutely ridiculous. So, you know, this is down to the government and not devolving the powers. So what we are doing is working with Impact on Urban Health to look at the messaging that we can get out to people that will encourage them and really get them to think. Don't think about the aesthetics. Think about the harm this is doing to you, to your neighbours, and contributing to pollution. And as we drive down pollution from vehicles, transport emissions, the proportion of that pollution, that toxic air, gets bigger is from wood burning, from construction emissions, from commercial areas. And these are all things that the Mayor is looking at. So wood burning, absolutely. And on construction emissions, for example, we have our non-road mobile machinery standards that we apply to construction vehicles. So these are all things that are happening now. There is a website out there and there is a working group. So I'm not quite sure which borough you're talking about.
It's mine, Merton.
Okay, then we will contact Merton to find out why they think there isn't anything happening, because they're certainly part, you know, everybody's part of that clean air hub that Global Action Plan have been helping us with, which is giving information to people on this. So and and lastly, if government had set the WHO 2030 targets in their regulations instead of 2040, this would have been something that would have really helped, I think, on that issue. And we know it can be tackled. We know we've got the solutions. We just need the powers and the funding from government to do that.
I appreciate your responses, and I do apologise for my passion and annoyance there.
That's okay. We've got Assemblymember Devenish to calm everything down.
Very, very good, Chairman. I'm first of all, I'm just going to say that I do hope that we can get into data, and because you are the Deputy Mayor to the most transparent Mayor ever, Mr. Khan keeps on telling us. So, Elliot, my question really to you is, could you reflect and write to us on the data of air quality? Because I think the fundamental issue is we all disagree on what the data says, and he says this, the Jacobs report says that, blah, blah, blah. Surely we must have data from 2016 to now to show whether air quality is getting better or not better, or it's basically staying the same in different bits of London. And if you can just frankly supply clear, concise and transparent data, surely Mr. Khan wouldn't have to call normal Londoners far-right extremists or Deputy Mayor try and talk about conspiracy theories when AM Best is an excellent public servant. So is it possible that you could just provide data which is clearly open and transparent and shows the current state from 2016 to date on air quality in London? Or are you going to say you can't because of JR?
No, I'm going to say absolutely we can. We're very lucky in London, the fact that we have one of the most comprehensive air quality monitoring networks in the world. It's been in place, I think, in part since 1995. That gives us great trend data so that we can actually understand what's happening in terms of air quality. We also have a world-leading inventory, which helps us understand emissions. This is really fantastic, valuable data, which enables us to really well understand what's happening. At a lot of these monitoring stations, it's collecting a sample of air pollution every 15 minutes. And then that is information that we hold, that we're happy to present in whichever way the committee would find helpful. I think some headline stats is that we've seen since 2016 a very significant reduction in pollution across London. I think it's something like in central and inner London, something like a 41% reduction in PM2.5. There's been a 35 to 40% reduction, I think, across London in terms of NO2. I'm happy to kind of pull that together and send that to you so you have that information.
I'd love major detail, and I'll declare I have actually been asked by the Spectator magazine, and they're a very clever bunch of people. They would go through it in fine detail because they do, as I'm sure you're aware, run quite a lot of data set analysis. So thank you for that. Made progress, there you go. And one final thing. I know every mayor does things slightly differently, and the previous mayor talked a lot about freight consolidation around the Olympics. You'll remember, Elliot, because you were here. At the beginning of this term, back in 2016, I did ask the mayor quite a lot about this, and he said he was, despite his disagreement with the previous mayor, he thought that actually was a good idea. We need to do more about that in the West End, in my constituency, but also across London. Although I've asked one or two MQTs over the last 7 long years, I'm not really sure where we've got on freight consolidation. Could you give me a short answer where we are, and maybe a longer answer in writing afterwards, please?
I'm definitely happy to come back in writing to provide a longer answer in terms of freight consolidation. I know that there have been some really valuable projects, particularly working, for example, with the Crown Estate around consolidation in places like Regent Street. Definitely, this is a valuable part of the toolkit in terms of how we can reduce congestion and reduce emissions. Historically, there have been some challenges working with industry and kind of making sure that we optimise this in the best possible way. And I'm happy to write a further update. I think that TfL has published relatively recently a freight plan which picks up on some of these issues.
Thanks, Assemblymember Clark.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to pick up on a few points from earlier in this conversation. Around wood-burning stove, I just had a quick look. It looks like in 2017, which is before my time on the Assembly, but the Mayor wrote to the government asking for powers to ban wood-burning stove where air quality is poor. Is this still the Mayor's position?
Yes, he's asked for the powers to be able to control.
And what is the government's response been on that?
Well, they didn't respond, did they? And they certainly, in the Environment Act, didn't allow that to happen.
So in terms of wood burning, DEFRA have given us occasionally positive noises around the fact that they are happy to look at this. But as the Deputy Mayor just said, in terms of actual tangible progress, it's been more limited. I know it's something that officers continue to raise periodically because I think, again, having a better range of tools which can be used in an appropriate way in a regional or local area, obviously supporting the boroughs to take action is important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just had a quick look on his social media, and he has been tweeting and things like this about that. I mean, it's just difficult when you don't actually have the powers to act to do something. But I do agree that we do need to do more on that, and it would be very, very helpful if the government would allow the mayor to do so. Just coming back on on ULEZ, and again, picking up on Assembly Member Kari's point about specifically that leaflet, I was amused and also slightly horrified that the Conservatives were putting that exact leaflet saying you will pay £12.50 a daily charge in a Barnet Council ward that's already in the ULEZ zone. So I was surprised by that. But equally, they seem happy with the misinformation, which I agree. I mean, when we think about COVID, the MMR, vaccines generally, misinformation leads to mistrust. It leads to that sort of corrosion of evidence of people respecting experts, and I do worry about that. And I think, I've seen pictures of myself greyed out by the Barnet Conservatives that they share on social media, which is, not helpful to constructive debate, and it's a worry. I'm just coming back to it, though. I mean, fundamentally, ULEZ expansion will deliver cleaner air for 5 million Londoners, and that is important, and that's at the heart of the matter. What health benefits will that bring?
So it's 5 million additional Londoners to end
5 million additional Londoners, yeah.
Absolutely. So the benefits that we've talked about are costed, I guess it's in terms of what's avoided. So if we don't do this, then we're going to see 300,000 more people getting some of those diseases. We talked about heart disease, increased risk to heart disease, dementia and so on. A cost to the NHS and social care system by 2030 of £10 billion. It's a very pertinent issue when the NHS is so much under pressure at the moment. This is a public health approach as well, as well as a health inequalities approach that the Mayor is seeking to extend to outer London to make sure that those benefits that inner London are getting will also accrue to them. We've had the Chief Medical Officer sitting with various other experts, public health experts, Rosamund Adukusi, Deborah, scientists, etc., talking about, this is absolutely an emergency. Unusually it was one of his, he does an annual report, and the last one was on air pollution. And he's talked about the importance of clean air zones in helping tackle that, and also raised, the issue of indoor air pollution, which we've also been working on as well, since 2016 as well. And obviously a lot of that indoor air pollution is coming from the ambient air pollution outside. So if we can drive down the pollution from outside, that's also going to help benefit indoor air pollution as well.
Thank you for that. And just because I know we're all waiting to go for a break, but that 10 billion of savings to the NHS, I mean, there's more to it than just those figures. It's the time people are in hospital, it's the shortened life expectancies, it's the lifelong illnesses that people are that are put upon people when we're breathing toxic air. And I think this is very much at the heart of ULEZ, and thank you for your work on this. And
and the Mayor's been really clear that, these are people, and as you say, these are when people get an asthma attack or when they suffer from COPD, I know it's really difficult. Siddiq said this, it's a cost of living crisis. We know how difficult it is. But then when you go to those emergency wards or those children's wards, or you talk to people through Asthma and Lung UK who are living daily with this, they can't leave their homes, they can't walk to the shops or just participate in normal family life. I remember at one of the summits that we held, a man was talking about his daughter who had an asthma attack, and every, saying like 1 week out of every 4, she would be sitting on the sofa, not able to, play with her friends, not being able to do much. And that's not just a few days, that's lifelong. And that is costing them their ability to participate in normal life, as well as the cost of the health to the health sector or the social care sector. So I do appreciate that people find it difficult in changing their behaviour, and that's really what the charge is about. The ultra low emission zone is to get people to think about the consequences of of doing this. It's not stopping people driving. It's asking people to think about the vehicles they use a cleaner vehicle, walk, cycle, don't use your vehicle so much. If you have to use your vehicle, then yes, there will be a charge unless you use a compliant vehicle. 85% in outer London, 94% of vehicles in London are already compliant. More and more, we believe are going to become compliant before the charge comes in when the ULEZ is expanded in August. So, please, for the rest of you, there is help available. There are vehicles out there that you can change your compliant vehicle. You don't need a new electric vehicle. I know that's a little bit of a myth that people think as well. And you're probably already compliant. Check your vehicle on the TfL vehicle checker too.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We're about to go for a break. Assemblymember Best has indicated one more question. Just because we're 5 minutes behind, can I just encourage brevity, please?
Thank you. I think a lot of the conversation was about having that honest debate, and I think sometimes it feels like that's being stunted because, for example, when we look at talking about the air pollution, we did it earlier when I was talking about some of the stats for my home area, which I'm generally concerned that this is the flagship policy and it has no effect right where I live, and I was kind of shouted down with it's eventually leading to some associations with climate denial, and I think that's the level of debate that people can't appreciate. And I just wanted to point again to the fact that when the Mayor put out that there was that estimated 21% reduction in inner London, he said of air pollution. Well, it's not of air pollution because air pollution is a composite of all the air pollutants. It's a reduction in nitrogen oxide. So when the very messages from the top aren't correct, how can it inform that rounded debate? Because then we're not talking about people need to understand the difference in air pollution. They need to understand PM 2.5. They need to understand that mainly comes from wood burning, as Hina said. And by the way, I should say the government have acted on phasing out the most pollutant stoves. That was efficient action that they took to phase those out by 2023. Those most pollutant wood burning fuels will be gone. But it's that level of debate. We're not having the well-rounded debate. It's coming from the top. Even we're not being clear about the stats.
I think we've been very clear about the stats. So Elliot's been talking about the so when we put out releases or whatever, we're very clear that it's NOx, PM 2.5 from vehicle exhaust emissions, which is why the percentages look small in the grand scheme of things. But when you're looking at exhaust emissions, it's big. Then when you look at the tons of NOx or tons of PM that's avoided, that's big. So yes, I think it's incumbent on all of us to really convey this information out there in a sensible way and a really clear way that people really understands the impacts.
So just that you appreciate you want that information to be accurate. So if I pointed you towards that mayoral tweet where he says air pollution is reduced by 21% when actually we're talking about NOx, would you be happy to pick that up and see that deleted so we can put out the correct information?
Well, I think the information is already there on our websites and our press releases. So, I mean, I can certainly take it back and ask people to look at it. But, for people to understand NOx and air pollution, then I think it needs all of us to understand and communicate that too.
I think it's also correct to say these schemes are having a massive transformative effect on air pollution as a whole, and you can see that in terms of.
But see, Elliot, this is the point. We're trying to have a discussion about having accurate data, and you're using a wild statement to detract from. I'm only asking if we can make sure that where we hang on, because I asked the question was whether we could make sure when we're talking about the 21% reduction, we say a 21% reduction in nitrogen dioxide, not air pollution, because that's not the same thing. That was the question. That was all.
You have also, from the scheme, seen reductions in PM 2.5. You've seen it in CO2.
Elliot, that's not the question. So the question is, can we be accurate about the information that we're talking about?
I'd like to think we try and be accurate. Yeah, absolutely.
So I pointed out somewhere where it's not accurate. Would you be happy to go back and look at that? And if it isn't accurate, make sure that tweet's deleted.
Absolutely, but I'm sure it will be accurate, but happy to look at it.
On that point of consensus, I'm going to pause as sort of consensus. It's 11:53. We're going to have an adjournment of 5 minutes, so back at 11:58. Thank you very much for your responses, and we will continue for the second part of our question and answer session with the Deputy Mayor. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone, to the second part of our Q&A with the Deputy Mayor. Just before we move on to our next section, which is on biodiversity, wild spaces and greening, I just want to pick up very briefly on a solar question from earlier on that I don't think we quite clarified. So I understand that there's a question around deposits and the HIES, and if Solar Together or Get Together were aware of deposits not being registered with HIES, and can I ask, if so, if this is related to the suspension of HIES membership?
I don't know if we know that, do we? No. And that's what we're trying to find out from both HIES and iChooser, is the circumstances, the exact reason for the suspension.
Thank you. And more widely, would you be happy to write to the committee with ongoing and future phases of a Solar Together programme, how we intend for that to work?
Future Solar Together programme?
Yeah.
At the moment, I think we're just concentrating on sorting this one out. But, you know, we are obviously keen to do more on helping people install solar on their own homes, but more generally we're doing some work on industrial estates, etc., etc. So I think we can talk to you more generally about our future plans, but I don't think we've got any specific plans for rolling out Solar Together until we know what's happening on this particular issue.
Thank you. Catherine.
If I could just be very specific about something, what has been suspended is the MCS Microgeneration Certification Scheme accreditation. The HIES, which is the consumer body, is reviewing GET's membership, but they haven't yet suspended them from that. We just know that it's under review. And I understand that's to do with consumer complaints. I've not heard specifically issues about deposits from iChooser in relation to HIES.
Understood, I think. Assemblymember McCartney.
Thank you. I'm starting our section on biodiversity, wild spaces and greening. And I want to ask firstly about the Mayor's new urban greening factor guidance. And its aim is to help increase the amount of green cover in London. But can I ask what mechanism there is to ensure that the sites are maintained and they're not destroyed or degraded? And can I also ask, there seems to be also a risk that developers may use it to compensate the destruction of existing habitats, and that was Friends of the Earth raised that at our last meeting, particularly if you're looking at replacing biodiversity or green space off-site or offsetting.
So the urban greening factor is a way of assessing the contribution that a particular development can make to enhancing green infrastructure and biodiversity on site. So there are certain levels and standards that we would seek those developments to attain, and then through the consultation with the developer and the negotiations and so on, sometimes they're exceeded, sometimes it's clear that you can't do it on site. And that's when the sort of biodiversity net gain issue comes in terms of sort of offsets and so on. But the intention, just like carbon offsets, is that we don't want those to be used. We want, the intention is to either, for carbon offsets, reduce the emissions, but for the urban greening factors, we want to see the urban greening integrated into those developments, because that's where you can bring nature closer to people, you can bring the benefits from climate resilience, etc. on there. And in terms of the how do we make sure that is sustainable, as in continues, then that's really the developer and the local authorities' planning conditions that make that sort of long-term sort of management and maintenance of the development as part of that programme. Usually, we don't have enforcement powers as the Mayor of London. The local authority does have planning enforcement powers, but we've alluded to this earlier, that local authorities have been stretched over time, and so sometimes ideally they would enforce more and more frequently and more consistently, but that's not always possible. So I think they often take a risk-based approach and identify, if you've got a developer that you've really worked with over the years and trust, and you've got community organisations involved and so on that can help with that process, then maybe they'll focus their efforts on other less helpful developers.
And in the GLA, have we got sufficient planning capacity to actually monitor the applications that come to us?
I'm not sure about we don't monitor them, but we process them. So when developers come in and want pre-application discussions, or when they submit their applications, then there is a process by which the planning team will coordinate and put their expertise in, and then they will call on the environment team for any assessments or input on a range of issues, and Catherine could probably talk about that. I'm sure if you said, were they fully resourced and could they do with more, I'm sure they'd always say they could do with more, but I think at the moment it seems fine. But
Okay, fine, thank you. And can I ask, how does the urban greening factor relate to the wider national policy of biodiversity net gain?
So the national biodiversity net gain policy has just been announced, and some of it is coming in a bit later this year. I was at a biodiversity net gain conference late last week with Natural England and developers and many others. It was packed, it was standing room only, and they were turning people away, which is lovely to see. And it was really heartening that that the policy that they've been taking forward was really sort of modelled on the work that we've been doing in London. So that was great news for the team and for the GLA and for the mayor. The urban greening factor relates, as I've said, it's really about what you might do on this site. But then, there's also the 10% biodiversity net gain sort of standard or requirement now that we need to make sure that developers keep to, so that we can enhance biodiversity.
Perhaps if I could just add to that, the biodiversity net gain can be very useful, but if you're starting from a very low baseline of almost no green, which can be the case in some parts of an urban area, then a percentage increase on that doesn't necessarily do a lot for nature. So we, in some circumstances, it will be very helpful, and we will have a statutory duty on that. But we also need to apply the urban greening factor too.
Okay, thank you. And can I ask, how is the Mayor ensuring that any biodiversity improvements happen locally?
Well, through a number of ways. So one is through the planning system, and setting that sort of overarching approach which borough local plans need to take into account, and there are RES designations. It's through the funding programmes that he has set up over the years. Since 2016, I think nearly £30 million worth of funding has gone into greening programmes, large-scale greening programmes like some of the work that we've done at Beckenham Place Park, or some of the sort of schemes that we've seen in North East London around climate resilience and restoring rivers and so on, through to much smaller projects where people can do, the sort of local, community orchards and gardens and small rewilding projects that we've been funding. So a whole host and a whole range of projects, and this is a really popular thing that people really like to see, because it really brings nature close to home, and we want to see more access, enable more people to access nature.
Okay, and I'm going to ask about trees next. The London Urban Forest Plan stated that in 2018 there were 373 wards in the city that were below the Forestry Commission's recommended tree canopy cover of 20%. Do we have any information, or are we tracking whether that has changed? And can I also ask, with regards to the Mayor's own tree planting programme, do you have any information about the diversity or age of trees that have been planted, including their survival rate?
On the former, we committed to monitor and report on tree canopy cover this year, every 5 years, and work's underway at the moment to update that tree canopy cover map. And you'll appreciate that there's no point really trying to do it year from year. You've got to wait for the trees to grow a little bit more so you can actually measure the change. So we should be able to report later this year on the difference on that. And then in terms of the sorry, what was the other?
Tree canopy cover in certain wards.
So that's the tree canopy cover map will show whether that's changed or not. And then just generally on tree planting, then yes, the Mayor continues to fund tree planting programmes. We've been working with Trees for Cities, for example, on the usual tree planting. Some slightly affected because of the bad weather at the end of last year. As a response to the extreme heat wave in the summer, the Mayor funded an additional £3 million to help support programmes to try and plant trees which would provide shade and respite for certain areas where we know that are more heat stressed, and people, would need that shade as well. So that programme has been allocated. I know some of that work was also to look at street trees and doing some feasibility studies with the boroughs, and that's underway as well.
Good, that'd be helpful to see that study when it's done.
Yeah.
At our last meeting, we heard from our participants about their Miyake method, about planting very dense mini forests that you can get into very small unused areas. Is that something that the GLA has looked at all, or will look at? It seemed to be they were very good for sites such as school playgrounds and so forth.
Do you know? I think I've seen the pictures of it, and I'm sure the teams have been talking to through the Forest Partnership and others, and I think it is this thing about the right tree, right place. That's not necessarily suitable for everywhere, and also you want part of it, because we're so limited in space for certain people who don't have home, access to private gardens and so on. So we also want to make sure that there's space there for people to enjoy the outdoors as well. But we can certainly find out from the team what the approach is, because I know I've seen certain planting going on in certain boroughs on that basis. And I just remember what you were saying about, do we measure the diversity of trees? I don't think we do, because I know when we fund trees, there are certain types of trees that we will plant and not plant, the right tree, right place, and so on. Do we monitor trees dying, or tree replacement and so on? I think we've been asked this before, and we don't do this. We ask through some of our funding programs, we ask boroughs, whoever's getting the receipt of the funding, to do that monitoring as well. It sort of depends on the capacity of the recipient. If it's a small organisation, it's unlikely. If it's a big local authority getting funding from the Forestry Commission, for example, then we would ask them to do that. But I think just to flag that it is expected some trees will not survive. So I think it's, and obviously stress like the extreme weather events that we've been having, will put stress on trees. And, we had the drought last year where we managed to persuade Thames Water, for example, to allow, which they hadn't been allowing, the temporary use ban to allow tree watering for newly planted trees, because that would have absolutely, seen a lot of trees that we had helped support planting to die. And we're expecting to see, if this comes back again, that, that goes in as a requirement.
Okay, thank you, it's helpful. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, and I just want to echo the applause of Trees for Cities. My partner was out with them last weekend in Victoria Park. I think they planted 106 trees from memory, and he said about 300 volunteers turned up, so it's amazing to see there's a real desire. It was about 3 to a tree. He said he spent a lot of time just standing around chatting to people, but maybe there is more work to do. Assembly Member Best.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor, since 2016, only 340,000 trees have been planted by the Mayor. Not personally, obviously, that would actually be quite an impressive feat. Which, when you take his promise to plant 2 million in the 2016 election, that would mean that target would be met in about 40 years, which surely can't be the target. I mean, you just mentioned there weather being one of the constricting factors. Are there any other constricting factors in why this target isn't being met, and why tree planting is low, that can be addressed?
So I think it was one of my first meetings here where we tried to clarify that wasn't a target. That was a discussion pre the Mayor becoming the Mayor. But his aspiration is absolutely to plant as many trees as we can. We have funded, since 2016, almost 440,000 trees, actually, including 2 major woodland creation projects in the Green Belt, I think in Enfield, so creating an additional 85 hectares of green space. And just to point out, that's a lot more than the previous Mayor managed. We are absolutely committed to doing more on tree planting, so working with organisations like Trees for Cities, the Woodland Trust, local authorities and government, because we know how important this is, both for carbon mitigation, but also for helping make the city more resilient to the extreme weather events we have, but also just making it a much nicer place to live. So absolutely we're committed to doing more, and we will carry on doing more, and happy to report back on those numbers as we get them.
Are there any year-on-year targets then?
We don't set year-on-year targets because it really depends on the applications that come forward from schemes. So some years there were very big ones because we were doing the 2 woodlands, for example, and then in other years there were very small schemes where you were doing maybe a little bit like the project that Assembly Member McCartney was talking about. And there are obviously trees that go in as part of developments and so on. So we don't have year-on-year targets, but there is a general drive to basically do as much as we can do with the funding that we do. So when we look at projects and assess them, we don't look just at the numbers. We look at whether it's the right approach for that community or for that borough, or how does it fit into a wider picture as well. So it's not just a numbers-driven thing, although we want to maximise the amounts of trees that we do see planted in London.
Of course, there must be a sense of a good and bad year, though. So, and if you could perhaps write to the committee in greater detail of what constitutes a successful year in terms of tree planting and what would be disappointing, that would be really useful to try and understand.
Mm-hmm.
I think the funding decisions that are in the public domain already about the Trees for London programme certainly set out a funding profile of this year, next year, how much we expect to spend, and that is associated, I think, with the total number of trees overall. So we could probably do the maths on that. How much is expected this year?
Thank you. Moving on to wild spaces, Assembly Member Bakhari.
Thank you, Chair. Yesterday, a petition from the Warren Farm Reserve group reached 20,000 signatures, and these campaigners have been campaigning on behalf of a meadow in Ealing, which is home to an abundance of common and rare and endangered species. Now, this is just an example of many sites across London that are under threat of development, and unfortunately, this is a case that seems to be increasing. Across London, which are designated as sites of importance for nature conservation? What action is the Mayor taking to try and protect these existing habitats?
Well, the sites of importance for nature conservation requires they're set out in the London Plan and the policy and the environment strategy to try to designate them and then support them. So, for example, the work that we're able to do, apart from that sort of planning designation, is through the Rewilding London Fund. For example, we've given money to help maintain or improve those sinks. And I think it was about 600,000 in the first round, and we're due to announce a second round shortly. And this round has had funding in order to help those managers of the 1,600 sites that cover London to be able to bid for support to improve.
I wrote to the Mayor a few weeks ago about this particular area, Warren Farm, and have not had any replies. And that's concerning because Ealing Council have been ignoring residents, ignoring environmental groups, have gone against this particular plan of the Mayor's as well to protecting these types of habitats. Will there be a response from the Mayor in terms of Warren Farm and Ealing specifically?
To that letter, yes, apologies that it hasn't got to you yet.
OK, well, I look forward to seeing his response on this. Does the Mayor have an assessment of overall picture across London about how many sites are under threat right now? Does he have an accurate idea?
I'm not sure how you would define under threat, but he certainly, we know which ones have been designated, and I think I don't think we have, no.
No, I think if planning applications are referred to the Mayor, obviously we'd then be checking it against that.
But not every planning application is of the site or issue for some of those sites. They're not necessarily going to be big enough to be referred to the Mayor. So it may be that we don't have a full picture.
Right, OK. Well, there's a rewilding task force that's been met 3 times and they're due to finish soon.
Yeah.
What has been the impact of this group, and when should we expect the conclusion of the rewilding task force?
Well, I chair the group, so we are in the final stages of signing off the report. So it's in design stage at the moment, and we should be issuing it shortly when we've got a date to release it. And that sets out the approach that we want to recommend in London on rewilding. So the sorts of rewilding that that people talk about, big species introduction, reintroduction, or big habitats restoration, may not be able to be done in London because, as you might do, say, in Scotland or in some of the other places around the country, because of the space that we have for rewilding that sort of level of scheme. But there's lots at the other end of the spectrum. There's lots of activity that can be done on smaller sites, which is a lot of the work that the Mayor has been doing since 2016 about how do you support nature recovery in those smaller sites, including sinks and so on. So what the partnership has been doing is looking at a framework and some principles on how you might approach that and encourage both ends, and then particularly what are the principles and where are some locations that you might consider for that large-scale reintroduction, not talking about species, because that really does mean somebody has to have a look at the sites to understand what's necessarily relevant, whether it's invertebrates or whether it's beavers or whether it's grazing animals or whether it's something else, which I won't mention. It'll probably set some headline off about what the Mayor wants to reintroduce in London. So having worked for Ken Livingstone many, many years ago, who one of my jobs was trying to reintroduce adders into London. That didn't go very well.
Okay.
I don't want to really talk about which species yet, but that work is underway, and then that really is down to the amazing people on that task force who've been absolutely brilliant in giving their expertise on this. So
you said there's a report that's going to be
published shortly, so it'll set out the frameworks, their recommendations. We've got the new London Nature Recovery Strategy.
Can you say some of the next steps that are in that report that we
Then
can
I will
share
be
them
breaking
now?
an embargo, so no, I can't.
Okay, all right. And the date for that report will be?
Shortly.
Shortly.
We're just trying to pin down a date, so we're trying to get this out because,
right,
like
okay.
I said, it's in design at the moment.
So we'll shortly see a report. We'll shortly see an answer from the Mayor about Warren Farm. Shortly, hopefully, he'll also change his mind and make sure that he is supporting the people of Ealing. I mean, there are many groups out there who are very keen to see Ealing change their mind on this particular issue, and I hope that the Mayor of London supports them. On to the nature recovery strategy as well.
Yeah.
What will be the process for developing the London nature recovery strategy, and what part of the GLA will lead this?
So that I was just going to talk about that new responsibility. So the Mayor hasn't formally been designated as, I think, what they call the responsible authority, but the strong indications are that he will. So we've been working to start the conversations with, which organisations would be part of the sort of working group on that, but ultimately the GLA will be leading the development of that strategy. But we know we can't do that at the GLA. We have to be working with local authorities, with all those land managers, those biodiversity experts and sink managers and others, to make sure that we've got that good input into what a London nature recovery strategy would look like. And part of the work of the rewilding task force has been to make sure that a rewilding is included in that into that work. So maybe that's a sneak preview of one of the recommendations there.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. I just want to pick up on Warren Farm Nature Reserve as well. I've been to the site several times. It's an incredible place. A lot of the focus has been on the skylarks. It contains a third of London's breeding population. And absolutely, the residents that I've spoken to really feel like Ealing Council have been ignoring them. Now, there's some other serious issues as well, aside from the wildlife, and that's around plant species and biodiversity. And in fact, there are plants on the site that are at threat of extinction. Now, the GLA's priority species plant list has 72 species on it, and someone from the Natural History Museum has spoken to me informally to say that 42 of those are now extinct. So they're saying essentially the species list is incredibly out of date. Would you commit to looking into that work and making sure that we do have priority there?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Then I'm going to hand over to Assemblymember McCartney.
You hand it over to me, Chair, or to Assemblymember McCartney?
I will go to Assemblymember Cooper then.
Thank you. Sorry, guys, I'm still going to keep the camera off because I'm still not looking any better. Hopefully, I might even sound a bit better. Deputy Mayor, I just wondered if we could come back to the 2016 manifesto and 2018 London Environment Strategy, which was signed off by the Assembly in May 2018. And I think one of the things that was in the final manifesto for 2016 was the issue about not talking about new tree planting, but actually canopy cover, which was mentioned in a previous question. Would that be correct? And is it correct that although it does talk about planting new trees, that the increase in canopy cover is also emphasised in the London Environment Strategy? And I wondered if you could just tell us exactly why that is.
Yes. So the target is to increase tree canopy cover by 10%, and that report later this year will be able to tell us that. I think the reason why, people like to know how many more trees are going in, and that's fine. But because the number of trees that go in are, different sizes, we've talked about the impact of heat and weather on their survival rates and so on. It doesn't really give you a true picture of why we plant trees, for all the nature benefits and the climate resilience benefits it brings. So that's why we've gone down that route. But we know that people will still want to know how many trees are planted, so we do try to keep a sort of high level estimate of that from the numbers that we get.
For sure, but the reason why the 2016 mayoral manifesto didn't talk about planting 2 million new trees but was focusing on canopy cover is that the benefits in terms of climate mitigation and adaptation are much greater from mature trees rather than new trees. Would that be fair to say?
That's right, and that's why we focus on the canopy cover piece, because that shows the size of the trees and the growth of the trees that would then give you those benefits.
Thank you. I just think it's important to clarify that, because I know that the Conservative members of the committee do like to refer back to something that wasn't put into the 2016 manifesto about the 2 million new trees, which of course hasn't happened, but focusing on canopy cover is a really important thing. One thing that did get into the 2016 mayoral manifesto was the pledge around the London National Park City, and that was then announced in 2019. Yep. This committee has heard from the head of the National Park City Foundation that more can be done to use the concept to engage people with nature. So what lessons have you learned from this work that's been done by the foundation about how to communicate the importance of biodiversity to Londoners, whether that's about tree canopy, whether that's about individual biodiversity amongst birds or grass, or planting native trees? If you could just set that out for us.
Yeah, and I think, we were really pleased to be awarded that designation in 2019 and have been working with the National Park City Foundation. I know they've got a new chief executive who's just recently joined, so I think the team have been meeting with them or him to look at ways that we can work more closely together. So one of the areas that we've been working on, for example, at the GLA on rewilding, is precisely goes to that sort of communication and messaging issue. What is it that really excites people and inspires people to get out, and do more in nature, and what are the programs that people want to participate in? So, working with organisations like Trees for Cities, who are really brilliant at bringing people together so that they can get their hands dirty and but also help benefit the wider community. The Rangers programme that the National Park City run is a really interesting programme, because it really brings in those champions from across the community that then can then lead on action within the communities once the funding programme has ended. And it's more about how we use that as a springboard for other environmental action as well. But as the GLA, as the Mayor of London, will carry on providing programmes that help support that sort of action.
I mean, I think one of the things that's really interesting is the way that you're talking about Trees for Cities and the National Park City Foundation. Those are both partner organisations, and Assemblymember Polanski just referred in this meeting to his partner's involvement in tree planting in Victoria Park, and I know that Assemblymember Best has also been involved in foreshore cleanups, and many of us have done these things. Have you got any indicators? Do you know in terms of awareness raising of London as a national park city, individual involvement, teams of people going out with onto the foreshore to do plastic cleanups or tree planting or planting of bulbs in the autumn, this sort of thing. Do we have figures for how many young Londoners, perhaps those at school, are involved in these sorts of things? So I think actually getting young Londoners involved is a really important thing. I think the getting your hands dirty issue and getting out into nature is really important for children.
Yeah, we do have numbers on the numbers of projects, for example, funded through the programmes. But then when we look at the projects, we ask the applicants to set out the sort of the target groups, who they're expecting to reach. And then we've been quantifying some of that. So we've got some numbers about the numbers of people actually the National Park City Festival reached, when we did the first festival in 2019, but then the tree planting programmes, how many people have been part of that and how many trees have been planted. On the rewilding fund, for example, we know that if all fully funded and implemented, we're estimating that 250 hectares of wildlife habitat will be created across London. Obviously, we need to confirm that when the projects are completed. So we do have that data. I don't know if we've got it by young people, but we can certainly find out and let you have that. But we do collect that data.
It would be quite nice to have it collated together so that we can see the involvement of Londoners, and I don't know whether it's possible to measure whether it's increased since 2019 when we were declared to be the National Park City. Certainly London Rivers Week, has attendance at that increased. River cleanups. There's a whole range of different things that Londoners get themselves involved in, and it would be quite nice to see if we can see that it's increasing. I'll leave there. Oh, sorry, thank you.
Well, I was just going to say, other than that COVID intervened, so there was quite a lot of but apart from that, happy to try and look at that.
Although in some cases, I think people were still doing some of that sort of more natural involvement, because it was one of the few things you could go out, you were allowed to go outside and do things. So certainly sort of maybe nature walks and involvement in friends groups. I don't know whether we measure these sorts of things, but it'd be quite interesting to know whether that's something that you were able to supply us with. But I will hand over back to the Chair now. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Perhaps we could commit to sending any engagement data for our own activities, like the London Nature Trails that we sponsored last year and the National Park City Festival, as the Deputy Mayor said.
Thank you. We'll add it to a list of commitments for this session.
I'm trying very politely not to say all of Londoners' involvement in all green activities, because I think that may be beyond the scope of my unit.
Might take some time.
But I think that we could write as a committee actually and request some of that from some external bodies perhaps to collate that together, Chair, because we know that the London Rivers Trust and so on and so forth may have some of that information available. Thank you. And Trees for Cities, there's a number of organisations.
I'd be very happy to do that, obviously with the caveat that I'll have to check with group leads offline. There's a charter for parks, which has been signed by Unison, Friends of the Earth, and Gardens Trust, to name a few. I asked the Mayor about this in a written question, and he wrote back some lovely warm words about the charter and what he's doing around parks. But I noticed that he didn't actually sign it or agree to sign it. Do you have any idea why?
I don't. I'm not sure it's in my notes either. So I wouldn't want to speculate without seeing the reply that went to you, and then.
If that makes sense. Would you be able to come back to me with? I genuinely don't know. It might just have been he's missed it, or there might be something on it that he objects to. But it would be good to kind of find out what it is that the Mayor's objecting to. Thank you, Assemblymember Best.
Thanks, Chair. I just want to clarify, because Assemblymember Cooper thought she was saying to help Conservative Assembly members. So I just want to clarify that in 2016 the Mayor promised to The Guardian that he would plant 2 million trees, and later followed that up with a tweet saying, "I'll plant 2 million trees in London in my first term as Mayor, focusing around schools." There's literally no other way to interpret it. Labour politicians, just take the L on that one, that he did make the promise and he did live up to it. It's not the political hill to die on. He made the promise. Let's just try and fix it and plant trees now. Let's not squabble, but he did make the pledge.
I'm going to take from that the consensus point of let's plant some more trees. Thank you. So moving to our final section, which is climate adaptation, we're going to start with flooding with Assemblymember Clark.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And just... On flooding, this is obviously it's a huge issue in London, but what progress is there on the Strategic Surface Water Governance Group?
It's met. It's agreed its terms of reference. We've got secured funding from the Regional Flood and it's Flood Coastal Committee, which is a sort of the Environment Agency sort of governance mechanism. It's being chaired by the Environment Agency and London councils, and we are scoping some work scoping a commission for work, which I'm not sure has gone out yet or is going out, to develop a strategy by the end of the year on surface water flooding. As you know, the responsibilities are complex on this. Each borough is a flood management authority. You've got the Environment Agency involved and Transport for London and so on. So it's very convoluted. There is no single overarching owner of this issue. So what this is trying to do is to try and get that coordination and that collaboration and an action plan that we can then use to drive action within London, but also get government to really understand this isn't just a unique London issue. This is one that is a national issue and is increasing and really needs to be grasped, because that surface, we're seeing the sort of flash floods increasing in intensity and frequency every year. I think there was a report out just recently, it was a 25% increase in insurance claims and so on because of flooding, and that's I don't think that's just surface water flooding, but generally these impacts are rising, and the costs to people as well as to property is huge.
And so it's always very complicated when you've got lots of agencies involved. I mean, I chair a very small, it's not very small, but it's quite significant, called the Welsh Harp Joint Consultative Committee, and we have things like the EA and Thames Water and lots of agencies and 2 boroughs involved, and that's complicated enough. But this is very, very complicated, but yet very important. Where did the idea of this group come from?
So after the surface water flash flooding, it was about 2 years ago, the Mayor convened a round table and pulled various organisations together to say, look, and we were, it sort of followed, it was around the same time as New York had some very bad flash floodings where, people had died, and we were, thank God it didn't happen in London, but that's not to say it could. We have many hundreds of thousands of basement properties, for example, where people could be affected. So really it was about how do we do 2 things. One is improve the immediate emergency response, because whether it's the fire brigade or the local authorities or Thames Water or the Environment Agency, there's always scope to increase the response to the incidents. And then secondly, how do we make sure that we protect London and Londoners as far as possible? And I think the caveat on this is that, we can't say that everybody will always be protected, but it's really to mitigate as far as possible and help people to reduce their exposure to the problem. And that's really the Fire Brigade and the Resilience Group did a whole internal review, which I think they published. Thames Water did their own review, and the round table pulled all these together. London councils did their review. These all came together, and the key recommendation from the round table was to create this coordination mechanism and get it moving quickly, recognising that whilst that's going on, there are still individual actions that we could be taking. So the GLA is working with London boroughs on what we might do next on surface water flooding for basement properties, building on the leaflet that we sent round to properties all over.
Yeah, so getting to the point of having a strategy is obviously very important, which you've stated, but what are your plans for the group in 2023?
Well, I think it's finishing off that strategy and then making sure that it's well resourced, and then making sure that the government take on board the recommendations and can help support London and London's institutions deliver that, but also that we carry on raising awareness amongst London that this is happening now, and how to protect yourself as well.
Okay, thank you. And is there anything you'd like to highlight about the wider climate adaptation work, particularly in adapting London to prolonged heat waves after last summer's 40-year heat wave?
Yeah, I mean, that's a massive issue. And, again, I don't think anybody was expecting that extreme heat wave and its length. And we know, we have done quite a lot of work in London to make sure the London plant policies, the environment strategy policies, we've got programmes like Cool Spaces, the Drinking Water Fountains programme, all of those things. But ultimately, this is sort of an existential threat. We have to really tackle this in a much more coordinated way. And I think that is something that we're working with the boroughs and various agencies to understand what the problem is. We have the London Climate Change Partnership looking at that. Transport for London are just about to have been looking at this as well. I don't know if you want to talk about that because you're probably closer to the document than I am.
Well, Transport for London recently released their draft adaptation plan for how they would address both their assets and their operations to make them better adapted to climate change. And I believe that's about to be published in the full version. I'm not sure if it's just come out or just about to come out, but the draft version was published a couple of weeks ago.
Okay. Yeah.
Just a reminder, Deputy Mayor, I think, needs to go. So please excuse yourself from the chamber, and we'll continue with Catherine.
Question? Yes.
I was just going to ask you quickly about retrofit and how that helps to adapt buildings when we're experiencing extreme heat, as well as keeping them warmer in winter.
It's really important.
Yeah.
And many of the measures that you put in for dealing with the cold can also help the heat. But I think, again, we talked earlier about the massive challenge retrofit we have just for insulation, for dealing with the cold winters. We also have to think about how we might help adapt homes for that extreme heat. And we have already made a start on this. So about 2-3 years ago now, we published guidance to care homes and I think early years settings and so on, hospitals, about how they might start to be thinking about adapting, their premises because of the occupants, and particularly vulnerable occupants like elderly people and young people. And I know the team have also been talking to the Care Quality Commission to make sure that that is included in their criteria for assessments, which I think they have done now. So I think we can confirm that, or they are about to. So absolutely live issue. And yeah, we're talking to lots of other organisations, including through the C40, about how we might do more in this area.
Okay, thank you.
Plus our water fountains and so on.
Thanks. Catherine, are you staying?
Yes, I am.
Okay,
yes.
I just
maybe just to add on that
Well,
point.
my remaining questions are on water fountains. Is that something you can answer, or should we write?
Yes,
should we write
fine.
about it? Is that fine?
Yeah,
okay.
I'll do my best.
Okay, great. So currently there's 110 new water fountains provided by the GLA and Thames Water. What plans are there for additional fountains?
Sure. So the programme which was completed last summer with that 110 water fountains was a partnership between the GLA and Thames Water. And in order to extend that programme, we would need to go through a new procurement process and a new agreement with Thames Water or any other water utility provider that wanted to join in. We are exploring the possibility of extending the programme, and we have asked Thames Water about it. We've said the Mayor is very pleased with the outcomes from the last programme, and it's had a very positive reaction from Londoners who've used the fountains, and some really good evidence about how many millions of plastic bottles have been saved because of them. Thames Water have also asked if local authorities would be interested in contributing. There are costs, of course, both to us and to Thames Water from both the installation, but in particular the maintenance. And so we are talking to the boroughs. We've occasionally had messages either from boroughs, from MPs, from yourselves saying, can my local area get a drinking fountain? So we're now going back and saying, would you put your money where your mouth is? How much would you like it? Yeah.
Okay, well, that was coming on to my next question, but I actually got to visit one of these within one of these fountains in Camden with the Mayor, and it was very popular and very clear that while he was using it, lots of other people were using it as well. How did you identify the initial locations?
That's an excellent question. I think it was based particularly on footfall, where people, obviously you want it to be used as much as possible. Also, we looked at accessibility issues. I'd need to go back and I can write with further details of how they were chosen, if you'd like.
Yeah, and before we get to request new ones, or hopefully at some point get to request new ones, has any assessment been made of gaps in the network and sort of general areas where they would be beneficial?
Yeah. Again, I think I better come back to you on that. I know that they've. We can see how it maps across different boroughs and sort of busy locations, railway stations, or kind of key high streets, that sort of thing. But can come back on that.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have, and thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I've got Assemblymember Devenish, then Assemblymember Cooper, then Assemblymember Best. Assemblymember Devenish.
Thank you. Going back to flooding. Have you got a plan of meetings for this year? How many meetings are you likely to be having? Is it monthly, quarterly?
Sure. So we've had one meeting of the Strategic Governance Group that happened in December. The next one happens in April. So at the moment it's on a slightly not quite quarterly basis, every 4 months. But we don't have the next meeting scheduled, as far as I know.
Have you read the committee's report on flooding?
My team have certainly read the report on flooding, yes, and I'm aware of the recommendations. Just to say that I think on most of those we feel that we are working on those where the GLA has got a responsibility to do so. There was one recommendation about raising awareness and a large-scale communications campaign, which we didn't think was for the GLA to lead. Yep.
Why?
So I think our understanding was that we weren't either the people that would be listened to most or have that responsibility, but we have, of course, been involved with the funding of the leaflets that went to houses, the 45,000 basement properties who were identified as being vulnerable. So we have done that, but that's not on perhaps quite such a large scale as was suggested by the committee.
I'm quite surprised about that. I think that's exactly why we have a Mayor of London for really to lead those kind of things, really. But as the Deputy Mayor has left, perhaps you could relay that to her, maybe reflect further.
I'd be happy to, and certainly during London Flooding Awareness Week, the GLA was active in November last year and the year before as well.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assemblymember Cooper.
Thank you. I think we should just remind ourselves on the record that the original programme of water fountains wasn't in the Mayoral Manifesto from 2016, but came about as a piece of work that was done by this very committee in a report that we produced, which had recommendations that led to the partnership with Refill London, so that Londoners can also go into various places and refill their water bottles. And the partnership with Thames Water on the 110 water fountains was directly one of the recommendations that we brought forward, and the Mayor then created some financing from the GLA, which was matched by Thames Water. So it would be great to hear if that programme is continuing, because it was initiated by work from this committee. But I had a very specific question for Catherine. I don't know whether she will be able to answer it, so she might have to come back to me. The water fountain outside Morden station, Morden bus station and tube station, is not working and has been wrapped up and unavailable for use for some weeks now. Is there a reason for that? When is it going to be fixed? And obviously at the moment, one of the local shops that participates in Refill Metronome has been happy for people to go there and refill their water bottles. But I think it would be great if that one could be sorted out, because it's obviously in an area of incredibly high footfall because of all the buses and the tubes. It's at the end of the Northern Line. So I wonder if you could fill me in on that. Thanks.
Yes, thank you very much, Assemblymember Cooper. Thank you for reminding us that there are indeed 4,000 refill points, and people can use the Refill app on their phones to find out where they can get water, often from cafes, shops, etc., as well as the 110 water fountains that the Mayor has had installed. I'm afraid I don't know about the specifics of the water fountain in Morden, but I'm very happy to look into it for you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. It reminds me of the time my colleague Sean spoke to Andy Byford about a particular carriage on the Elizabeth line that was leaking water.
Well, one of these days I will surprise myself by knowing the answer to that very specific niche question, but sorry today.
Assemblymember Best.
Thanks. I think the last that we heard about water fountains, which was quite disappointing, was that no other water providers wanted to sign up or help with the scheme, which, given how well it's worked with Thames, was really disappointing. So I just wanted to check, firstly, if there was any better news on that, or any different ways of which we've been able to work with those companies. And the second question is, if we are able to relaunch a similar scheme in the future, will there be an opportunity for a redesign of the water fountain?
Yep. Obviously the successes of the recently completed programme have been well trumpeted by the GLA and by the Mayor, and we would hope that that would be attractive for the other water companies. I don't know why they didn't join in last time. I suppose Thames Water is sort of very associated with London, maybe in its sort of branding and mentality. Maybe it felt particularly committed. We'd of course be delighted if other water utility companies wanted to participate and to contribute to that. So I don't have an update. I do think that political pressure makes a difference when it comes to the companies deciding whether they're going to invest in this. So.
Perhaps if the committee was minded, we could write then, I suppose, to those companies.
Again, caveat it with, we'll check in with group leads, but certainly a piece of work for us to go into.
Oh, and I beg your pardon, there was a question on design. So the fountains were designed to be visible, kind of clearly identifiable as people went past them, hence the very bright colours. Also to be accessible, so they, whether it's somebody in a wheelchair, child, somebody with other physical needs. So, you know, I think those have been the key criteria that were in there. Also robust, so that they would last. So those were the sort of design specifications. I don't think there's been any discussion inside the GLA about changing that. And they are well recognised. And not loved by everybody, perhaps, but, you know, iconic.
Thank you. I'll save you there from well recognised and iconic and before you find any other adjectives. Just a final question from me. On Tuesday, we had a Fire Resilience and Emergency Planning Committee where we had an excellent discussion about wildfires. One of the things that was brought up by the Deputy Fire Commissioner, Jonathan Smith, was that he's doing a piece of work on managing vegetation. Very concerned or very aware of avoiding the conversation in the future where wildfires are spread by trees, for instance, and that becomes a conversation about chopping down trees. Can I just check that you and the Deputy Mayor are keyed in on that conversation and there to protect biodiversity as well as obviously protecting Londoners?
Thank you very much. Yes, we have been involved in discussions about the resilience to heat waves and to fires as well. And obviously what we saw last summer with LFB having its busiest day since the Second World War was really eye-opening. I live just opposite some woods, and, you know, that sort of thought went through my head as well, of, you know, these are my friends, not something I want to worry about in terms of fire. So we were involved with the London Fire Brigade. They conducted an incident review after the events last summer, and came up with various areas where they thought that improvements were needed. So on the prevention and protection, which included habitat management strategies. So I think that's probably where that issue falls. But yeah, happy to be referred to the specific conversations that are taking place and make sure that my officers are attending.
Brilliant, thank you so much. I can't see any further questions, so on that, thank you very much to Shirley and to Elliot, but particularly to you, Catherine, for managing the whole 3-hour stint as well. And that is the end of the Q&A part of this session. We have a few more items of business to deal with, but feel free to get out while you can. Can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion?
Noted.
Can we also delegate authority to me as chair in consultation with party group lead members to agree any output arising from the discussion?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Can I ask the committee to agree to delegate authority to me as the chair in consultation with party group lead members to agree any output arising from the committee's informal meeting on 10th of November 2022 on the Green Bond Programme and GLA climate budgeting?
Agreed.
Thank you. Date of next meeting. The next meeting of the Environment Committee will be confirmed at the London Assembly's annual meeting on the 4th of May 2023. Before we conclude today's meeting, I would like to draw the attention of committee meetings that there is an audience with the London Assembly session with the TfL Tube Noise team immediately after this meeting. This session has arisen from a commitment made to the London Assembly at the Assembly's plenary meeting in June. It will take place in Committee Room 1 from 1 till 2 p.m. I have no more urgent business, which concludes today's meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.